Attend, O reader, our tale of wonder. Welcome back to Paper Cuts, everybody, where this time we're going to be finishing up Wearing the Cape by Marion G. Harmon. Previously, our main character, Hope, uh, basically ascended into being a superhero thanks to the power of trauma. I'm putting it in a very small nutshell, but in setting, if you experience a large enough trauma, you have the chance to develop superpowers. And Hope developed essentially into what a DC Comics reader would call a Supergirl. Um, and surprise, the Superman analog of the setting, his name's Atlas, wanted a sidekick. And so he decided to keep her around. Much foibles ensue, and most recently, there has been a massive earthquake in California, and they're working on disaster relief. But, the standard secret identity shenanigans happened along the way. Hope is trying to make sure that the people in her private life don't know her in her public life, and vice versa. Trying to have a social life while burdened with the efforts of being a full-time superhero. That whole thing. Anyway, let's get started with chapter 36. With great power comes great responsibility. Stan Lee, Marvel Comics. With great power comes great perks. 7, The Hollywood Knights. That was a terrible Stan Lee, I'm so sorry. On day 4, dispatch stood us down for a half day. The restored and expanded runways at LAX Airport and the new ones at Whittier Base, just south of downtown LA, were landing megatons of food and supplies every hour. The reopened freeways brought in convoys of stuffed trucks sent by Deseret Industries, the Salvation Army, and other non-government organizations too far back in the airlift queue. Rescue work had slowed as the traps had been dug out, and the camps were now well organized. So, 7 called to invite us all to dinner. After 3 days of meal bars and canned food, we certainly welcomed the invitation. Oh, I forgot to mention, most previously, Hope and, well, uh, Atlas and Astra, in costume, obviously, were in the process of delivering supplies to people in need. And this guy who lost his daughter in the earthquake became so enraged at seeing these two superheroes flying along and his daughter having not made it that he literally burst into plasma-based flame. Like he got so mad after all of that trauma that it caused him to have fire superpowers. He then proceeded to plasma beam both Atlas and Astra, and Atlas got the brunt of it, but they've both recovered by now because, super strong, super healing, that kind of thing. But I figured I'd bring that up. Restormal had weathered the clay. Restormal had weathered the quake. Can I please speak? Restormal had weathered the quake easily, and with the mobile military hospitals up and running, it was now no longer an emergency center. A tall, white, circular building, faced with stone and suggesting a medieval keep, it stood watch over LA from a perch in the Hollywood Hills. With its own power generators, it shone like a beacon against the darkened neighborhoods surrounding it. Landing on the crenellated roof, we found 7 waiting for us by the flagpoles. Seeing his tie and dinner jacket made me glad I'd worn my skirted costume. He gave me a smile. Glad you guys could make it. Right this way. He led us through the roof gardens, kept by Saris, and down the outside stairs to the lower penthouse deck. The night's meeting room filled half the penthouse level, huge windows giving a panoramic view of the city. Tall hedgerow dining chairs had replaced normal conference chairs around their huge round table, and goldware table settings gleamed under an amazing crystal chandelier. The whole team waited for us, uniforms spotless and pressed, as impressive as the room. Attention knights, Rook said as we entered. His team quieted, turning to face us, and he lifted his glass. I give you the sentinels. Long may they stand ready. The others' lifted glasses kept ready at hand, repeating the toast. Now that's hardly fair when we're not armed yet, Atlas said. You can fire a return volley later. Let's eat. He led the way to the table, where I saw that place cards had been set out for us. They seated me between Seven and Maui as the servers, two guards in security uniforms, brought out the first dish, a flavorful cream of mushroom. An identically uniformed sommelier, who looked suspiciously like Willis, poured the wine, of course, sparkling grape juice for me. The formal welcome and setup put me in the mind of an officer's mess, reminding me that Rook was former Army, and that, like the Sentinels, the Hollywood Knights were state militia members. Atlas sat across from me between Saris and Firelily. Seven formally introduced me to Maui, a dark-skinned, hawk-featured man with short black hair and swirling tattoos covering the right side of his face. The patterns of his layered green and black spandex bodysuit echoed his tattoos, and he wore a hook-shaped bone carving at the throat under his open collar. Even in our colorful crowd, he looked exotic. Turning to talk to Artemis on his own left, Seven let Maui carry the soup course conversation. I promptly asked him why he'd named himself after an island. The island is named for me, he corrected me. Or rather for my patron. Many Maori believe the superhumans are awakened gods, Waiura. Because I can shapeshift, even can take on and put off new powers as needed, back in New Zealand they called me Maui after one of the gods' far old creation myths. Well, me, I'm a Mormon, but I accept the name as an honor and a warning. A warning? He nodded. Maui wrestled with the sun to make the day long for me. The North and South Islands of New Zealand brought fire to man, and he died trying to bring us immortality. Good object lesson, don't you think? Ouch. He chuckled at my exaggerated wince, and we shared smiles, having succeeded at being mutually charming. So, what kind of shapeshifter are you? I asked. Any kind. He leaned in. Want to see a trick? When I cautiously nodded, the tattoos on his face flowed from right to left, then ran down his neck to disappear under his bodysuit collar. He winked at my surprised laugh. After that, we talked about hometowns. I told him about Chicago, and he told me about Auckland. On social autopilot, I had time to think and look around, and I smiled to myself. All 9 of the Hollywood Knights were what only could be called beautiful people. All of them had the kinds of bodies only good genes and personal trainers could make, and faces cosmetic dermatologists, in some cases plastic surgeons, had lavished their skills on. With a GQ dressing exception of 7, their costumes were designed by the Andrews of the West Coast. I felt flattered Rook had even hinted that I could fit in with his team, even if he'd done it to Needle Atlas, who sat across the table, entertaining and being enthusiastically entertained by both his beautiful partners. The servers replaced the soup with a macrobiotic salad dressed with raisins, walnuts, and a wonderful honeyed dressing. They thoughtfully provided varieties of sorbets and flavored ices for Artemis. I switched conversation partners so Maui could talk to Chakra. Oh, if you haven't been caught up, Artemis is a vampire. Just in the same way that people can break through from strong emotions, people can also break through from strong devotions. And there was this emo kid who really, really wanted to be a vampire. And, he was doing the whole method acting thing. And eventually the malnutrition from drinking only blood got him. And then, surprise, he rose from the dead. He's been a vampire. And he changed Artemis because, he's like, I'm a vampire. I need a harem of women, of course. As someone who would be interested in the classical idea of a vampire. Interested in becoming the classical idea of a vampire might be. If you think about it, what Dracula represents in the story, which we've gone over that on the show. Anyway, to make a long story short, he bites Artemis. Artemis is like, I didn't want to be this. You've ruined my life. Get staked. And then he got staked, and now Artemis is a vampire. Artemis is a vampire. Astra met Artemis at a superhero club, and they became fast friends. So much so that Artemis wound up being recruited onto the superhero team that Astra is on. Anyway, how are you feeling? Seven asked. Overwhelmed. I looked at my plate. I know everything here is just really well prepared stock, came from your pantry, and nobody's starving yet, but it really feels like we're eating dinner on the Titanic or fiddling while Rome burns. Standing behind me, Willis cleared his throat. Wine, madam? It's Italian. I choked. Rat, I whispered while Seven snorted into his napkin. Union rules, he said, once we could speak again. Seriously, even in emergency situations, we can only work so many hours before being required to break. You're kidding. Oh, I wish, but we deal with more big disasters than you do. We're busy every fire season, keeping half the state from going up in flames, and we're one of the first response teams for any ocean-related disasters around the Pacific Rim. So, unless the peril's mortal, we're required to take our downtime. I'll pass your compliments on to our chef. He's used to working with anything in the field, so tonight's just simply nothing. I sighed, but our local coordinators had required us to take the evening off, too. Otherwise, we'd be scab labor, I supposed, so I couldn't argue. Still, it felt very wrong somehow. I think the union's onto something here. Even if you are super powered and super capably uh, able to avoid fatigue that a normal person can, you don't want someone who is over fatigued making emergency decisions in an emergency situation. That's how you get, to put it bluntly, live stream footage put on the news. It is best to take a break, even if you feel like you can save the whole world. But what I meant, Seven clarified, was how are you feeling after yesterday? Oh, good as new, really. None of the other knights had been here when we'd come in to be treated yesterday, but obviously Rook filled them in. I faked a smile, playing with my salad. It's like a 5-day-old sunburn, really mostly a memory. What's gonna happen to Mr. Walters? He studied me. They've rated Mr. Walters an A-class energy projector. Since you can't disarm a superhuman, that means they'll keep him in the box until they're confident he won't try and randomly fry anyone else, or they could suppress or counter his power. His lawyer will probably try and plead temporary insanity at trial, but that doesn't fly well when you're permanently armed and dangerous. Might be true, but it's beside the point. The best you'll get is a guilty plea on attempted murder, 7 to 15. Oh, is there any way? I mean, Astra, he tried to kill you. I shrugged helplessly, sipping my grape juice to loosen my throat. He's not a supervillain. He wasn't 2 days ago. Seven gently disagreed. Who knows what he is now? He kept studying me, and I looked away. This Seven had been invisible at the convention. I read your public file when I got back, and I've kept up, he said quietly. Breakthrough in a bombing with fatalities, just last fall. You've been in 4 fights before yesterday's, if you call that ambush a fight. And this, he waved at the city outside the windows. You've seen more serious action in 3 months than we've seen all last year. Are you holding up? I looked down at my salad. This dressing's amazing. Honestly, sometimes it's horrible. And sometimes it's just too woody for words, like yesterday. How do you deal with it? I don't know. I gave him a smile. I just do. Sometimes I don't. But I'm lucky. I've got family and friends behind me. It's scary sometimes, but what else would I be doing with it? How about you? He shrugged. We train for it, but the Hollywood Knights is less of a fighting team than the Sentinels. We're one of the best emergency response teams around, but we spend most of our time making movies, doing appearances. What? You don't what? You don't fight a new master villain every year? I suppose you've never been seduced by the slinky lady villain either, and turned her in a double play? Now he laughed. Which you just described half of our movies. I kept the alternating conversations light through the main and dessert courses. Atlas did manage to get in a toast to our hosts. Watching Fire Lily in her red-flamed leather corset make a play for him, I realized something and got a glow that wasn't from the wine I hadn't drunk. I trusted him. Something loosened inside at the thought. I knew how I felt, and as inexplicable as his attraction to me was, and from Christmas to New Year's I'd wondered, agonized over how much of it was simple protectiveness, the careful way he treated me, then and now in LA, told me everything I needed to know. I knew what I wanted now. Seven watched me watch Atlas, and I blushed when he raised an eyebrow in his glass in a silent toast of his own. Timing is everything, he said with a grin, making me blush hotter. And I'm not always lucky. We made an early night of it, returning to the hotel to get some rest just before going back on the job. For the second night in a row, I dreamed of burning and falling, woke up to find Atlas's arms around me, and went back to sleep. Ugh. Part 8, Chapter 37. Come to me in my dreams, and then by day I shall be well again. For then the night will be more than pay. For then the night will more than pay the hopeless longing of the day. Matthew Arnold. Loaded trucks filled the cleared and reconnected roadways, but we kept busy flying power generators and atmospheric water generators to the camps, as well as food pallets and other heavy equipment that would seriously slow traffic if hauled on wheels. It'd be weeks before most places regained full power and water. On the afternoon of day 7, they stood us down again. Not that there wasn't a lot left to do, but after a week on too few hours of sleep, recovery coordinators ordered our whole team to take 2 full days. But we'd done it, between the efforts of superhuman responders from all the states, from around the world even, and the material and labor poured into California by the federal and state governments and private institutions besides. We'd beat the disaster curve. The tragedy wouldn't escalate. Blackstone and Chakra promptly disappeared together. Nimbus left to attend a performance of the Strasbourg Philharmonic Orchestra. Yes, in Strasbourg. Quinn said something about hitting Las Vegas with Rush, Artemis went to bed to rest up for a night out, and Ajax buried himself in his room to call family and work on a paper. I noticed that none of them asked Atlas or me what we were doing. Left alone in the Motel 6 lobby, he pulled me into a hug, arms under my cape so I wouldn't just slide out. I sighed against him, floated up a bit so he didn't have to stoop, and planted a long kiss. He didn't resist. Pulling back, I put my hands against his chest and looked up at his sweet, tired face. John, I squeaked. I swallowed and tried again. John, how serious were you when you said I could have it all? He smiled. Well, it's rushing the gate to follow the first kiss with a marriage proposal, but where I come from, if a man's sweet on a woman, she's sweet on him, they don't lollygag about. Lollygag? I laughed, light-headed. Yes. One of those words us old-timers use. Reckon even if I have to wait, I'll get a few good years with you before general decrepitude sits in. Stop that. I slapped his leather-clad chest. You're 27, not 200. She's like 18, 19, something around that. I'm looking this up because I don't want to be wrong about it. That's not what I wanted. Oh, that does show the table of contents, though. Duly noted. Hang on. I'm looking this up. Because I want to remember what her age is, just to keep it in mind. Yeah, in Wearing the Cape, she is 18. Just thought I'd point that out. Anyway. You're 27, not 200. Winding my arms around his neck, I resumed kissing between words. How do you feel about a spring wedding? His arms went tight, and he slid his hands up to grip my shoulders and pull me away, breaking the wonderful suction. Hope. Don't, I said, keeping the smile on. If you're sure, I'm sure. If we're sure, then soon. Very soon. He studied me for a long minute. Fair enough, but he frowned. I'm not mint condition, you know. Tossed by my first, and since then, I put a hand to his mouth. Stop. I know all about your fan club, and I'll bet Chakra could tell me a story. And it's not a problem? It is, I said, honestly. As you Texans say, done is done, but if you stray, I'll cry and break your legs. Well, I love you too, he said, pulling me close again. We've got time. Your family will try to talk me out of marrying an older, non-Catholic divorcee, I finished with a sigh. Dad'll try and kill you, then Mom will want to plan the biggest wedding in Chicago history. I'll have to out myself for it, but for you, I'll make that sacrifice. I leaned back so I could see his eyes. And we don't have time, I said. Not really. I mean, I almost died. He started to shake his head, and I grabbed it in both hands, framing his face. You saved me. You'll always be there to save me, but if, then they'll bury Hope Chandler. His changeable blue eyes looked into mine, and I held my breath. Then he laughed and kissed me so hard my toes curled in my boots. I accept your proposal, ma'am. And for now, what would you say to 3 nights at the cabin? Strictly hands off, of course. I sighed, dizzy with relief. Not completely hands off, but yes, please. That beautiful smile widened. Done then. You saddle up and meet me back here in an hour? I pulled myself up for another quick kiss, then ran for it. My kit had one last fresh skirted costume. I washed thoroughly but fast, almost too giddy to function, before throwing it on and packing necessities to wear for the both of us. Then I stopped. Wait, I had nothing to wear for this. I didn't go crazy, but I like wearing nice things. And all I had was my costumes. John certainly had a closet full of his own things at the cabin. I almost wept in frustration, forced myself to think. We were on Hollywood Boulevard. Sure, it had been wrecked, but there hadn't been any looting. My family had played tourist in LA a couple of times, and I remembered a Forever 21 in the Hollywood and Highland Shopping Center attached to the Chinese Theater. It took me 2 minutes to reach the center, amazingly still standing, though not open for business, and I persuaded a security guard to let me into his glass-strewn hallways. In the store, I found an insanely dedicated manager, who probably wasn't supposed to be there, and promptly dumped my situation on her. A godsend, Kathy even got me into the Victoria's Secret across the hall, run by her friend. 15 minutes of questions, suggestions, IOUs for her and VS, and an autograph later, I headed back with filled bags. Getting back with a few minutes to spare, I finished packing and made it out front before Atlas returned. My hand in his, we took off, racing to beat the sunset. Atlas's cabin lay tucked in the Bear River Mountains in Utah, and we reached it well before nightfall. More a log mansion than a cabin, it sat surrounded by pine and aspen and covered in snow. Landing us at the steps to the wraparound porch, John took my bag from me and swung me up in his arms. I laughed as he carried me through the door. He set me on my feet in the entryway. The inside was all polished wood and wood furniture, Indian rugs and Western art, the lights on and a fire already burning in the living room. Apparently, the resourceful man had the whole place computerized. I keep a good pantry and freezer for sudden visits, he said softly, not letting me go. So I can whip us up some dinner in an hour, but first, say the words. What? I've said it. You haven't yet. I stared up at him. The man was right. I had said the words to my parents and siblings all the time, long distance if need be, but I'd never said them to the dear man patiently holding me. How had that happened? I laughed, then tried to look serious. I love you. It was so easy. Say it again. I love you. One more time. I wrapped my arms around his neck. I love you, I whispered, and then he kissed me. It took a while for him to get to the kitchen. Upstairs, I unpacked quickly, then stripped down and showered again, pulling on my new underwear, and laid out the rest of the loot from my expedition. Pulling my hair back, I looked at myself in the mirror, tried to imagine what he saw, and sighed. He sure didn't see an Atlas girl. I was too small, and though my muscle tone helped my legs and butt, the best I could say for my chest was it wasn't flat. At least I had a good face. Wide forehead, big blue eyes, nice nose, good cheekbones, lips almost lush, good skin. My severely bobbed hairstyle gave me a little more maturity than I would have had. I shook my head. Enough. I sighed again and turned away to pull on the new stretch denim jeans and a white cashmere sweater. Casual pull-ons went on my feet. Then I went downstairs to discover that John hadn't been kidding about dinner. He microwave thawed some steaks and stood grilling them over a fancy range, and I smelled baking potatoes. He looked absolutely ridiculous moving around the kitchen in his uniform, like a knight in shining armor, playing golf. His eyes lit up when he saw me, and the look in them made the tension inside me wind tighter. If you stay where I can see you, dinner might not get... I got that backwards. If you stay where I can see you, dinner might not get done. No touchy, then. I'm hungry. What can I do to help? Can you do the salad? Started some pasta, and the other fixings are in the fridge and cabinet on the left. I'll get upstairs and change. I saluted and got to work, and he came back down in a minute, dressed like the cowboy he was. Finding some extra virgin olive oil, balsamic vinegar, and minced garlic, I mixed up a dressing and made up small bowls of sun-dried tomatoes and other ingredients to sprinkle on. A slate-topped work table over wood cabinets filled the kitchen's center space, so we had to move around each other as we pulled everything together. We finished and set the table in time to sit and watch an extravagant winter sunset through the cabin's big bay windows. The deliciously done and seasoned steaks, flaky potatoes topped with butter, chives, and sour cream, and my modest pasta salad made a perfect meal. John brought out a full-bodied Napa Valley Cabernet to go with the food, and I sipped a little. We sat at corners from each other and ate and watched the sun drop into purple mountains. A good thing, because, delicious as it all turned out, I found I couldn't look at him and eat at the same time. Passing dishes and condiments brought our hands into proximity all through the meal, and we talked quietly about the mountains, what my family did for vacations, the ranch in Texas his parents and younger brother still worked, the little things. The meal done, he had me sit on the couch in front of the fireplace while he put the dishes in the sink. I'd have insisted on helping, but by that point I was afraid of dropping anything I touched. Then he grabbed a horse blanket, took my hand, and led me outside. The elevated porch in the back of the cabin held rough wood furniture with deep but weatherproof cushions. He pulled the weather covers off and stretched us out. He pulled the weather covers off and dropped onto the outdoor couch, patting the cushion beside him. When I self-consciously sat, he turned me so my back rested against his chest. Sighing, I tucked my legs up. Excuse me. Sighing, I tucked my legs up and snuggled in. He kissed the top of my head and whispered, "Look." I did and laughed. "You're always giving me stars." With the cabin's outside lights off and no towns for miles, the stars twinkled in the winter night even more brightly than they did high over Chicago. The thoughtful man had even ordered a meteor shower, and I started wishing on every falling star I saw. Every wish was the same. I don't know when I fell asleep. We didn't really need the blanket, honestly, since both of us could laugh at our good temperatures. I woke up sometime deep in the night and realized he'd stretched us out, so his legs were up and I was using him as a mattress. Kissing him on impulse, I flushed when he chuckled, obviously wide awake. Thinking about our position, my flush got hotter. "Doesn't bother you?" I whispered. "Waiting till the wedding?" The chuckle turned into a growl. "I want to make love to you so bad I can't stand it," he said, but his arms tightened as I tried to sit up. And I'm not the least bit tempted. A kiss, and he pushed my hair out of my eyes. Waiting's a small price for not pushing the woman I love into something she'll regret. Oh. I touched my St. Agnes medal, worn around my neck since I turned 16, and almost wondered if I'd really regret it. My suddenly racing heart told me I clearly found myself in what Father Nolan sternly called a proximate occasion of sin. Chuckle returned with a few more kisses. Promise me you're not considering it, or we're getting off this couch right now. I hid my burning face in his neck. A little. No, we don't have to move. I'll be good. Promise. He relaxed, obviously relieved to not have to go completely against nature and kick me out of the impromptu love nest. I sighed, settling in and looking up at the stars. Can I ask you something? If you must. Laughter rumbled in his chest. So, to misquote Shakespeare, I pray thee now, when did you first suffer love for me? He was quiet for a long moment, then he kissed my hair. Honestly, when you threw up. What? I tried to sit up and his arm tightened again. Most capes, he continued seriously, go through months of training before they ever go out in the field and encounter a situation like you did on that first day. There you were, all prim and proper, like we were at a society luncheon. Held it together for so long afterwards, begun to wonder if you had any nerves in your body. He played with the ends of my hair, stroked my neck with the back of my hand, a hand, and I shivered. You only lost it once you were safe and nothing needed doing. Even then, you pulled it back together so fast, thought you'd be useless for days. You look fragile, but you're one of the strongest women I've ever met. Wanted to dry your eyes and kiss you senseless so bad my teeth hurt. All I could really do was pass you a water bottle. A thumb moved over my cheek, wiping away the ghosts of tears. Oh, I said stupidly. Oh. My blush returned and turned into a rush of warmth. One of the strongest? I asked to distract myself. Well, there's my mother. Ah! Rat, I laughed, bringing my fist down on his chest again. He grabbed my wrist. So you're one of those girls, are you? Best I know now. I sat up to swing my free hand, and he grabbed it too, pulling me back down. So, be fair, he whispered in my ear, making me shiver again. How'd you put it? When did you first suffer love for me? I wiggled in closer, ducking my head down. When I was 10, I confessed against the shield of his chest. Now it was his turn to be confused, and I let it out with a rush. Shelley and I played superhero and dreamed about team-ups, and I always said it was Volt or Burnout, but looking at your pictures just made me feel warm and safe. Volt went off to Hollywood, Burnout had his own band, but you were always up there, protecting us. I imagined being Mrs. Atlas. I finally dared to look up. When Shelley died, I did a good job of forgetting about it until the ball. Then it came back bigger and all grown up. Super Pooh, where's your cape? My God, he groaned softly. Both arms went around me and released. Having been released, mine slid around his neck. It seemed to be where they belonged. The growl came back, a low, thrilling rumble in my ear. It's time to shut up now, or we're gonna need separate rooms. I laughed gaily, snuggled close, and fell asleep before he did. I there are there is the ending of this book, like, it's being set up very aggressively here, I think, is what I will say to you all. I don't know, man. I really like this book really has its ups and downs. There's a lot of things that I didn't really care for when I read it when I was younger, and now I do care for when I'm reading it now, and vice versa. And we're about to come into a section of the book that I'm fairly sure is going to be a great example of vice versa. But we'll see. Maybe it was done a little bit more delicately than I think it was. But either way, it's going to be a good read. Um, while I'm off topic, though, not just to talk about the book, but also I have a few things to promote myself. Did you know that we are recording a podcast? It's true. This is Paper Cuts, and you can also find Paper Cuts in your favorite podcatcher. I tend to use Spotify, but there are probably better options in the world. Alternatively, you can look at the site that Libsyn provides me with hosting, papercutsbooks.libsyn.com. Uh, and we're actually about to shift release models. This coming Saturday, we're going to finally be releasing episodes from season 3, and we're going to be shifting to a weekly model. So every Saturday, I plan on aiming for roughly noon each Saturday. We're going to be seeing an episode of Paper Cuts on the podcast feed. This does differ from the streamed episodes, so if you want to keep up with the book at the maximum speed, coming in live is the best option. But, you know, uh, you still have the option of listening in your favorite podcatcher. Anyway, let's dive into chapter 38. In the aftermath of the event, the United States found itself putting out fires all around the world. Context, if you haven't been here, the event is the moment that people first develop superpowers. A bunch of people got it all at once, and then it slowly occurs to people in trauma following. Anyway, in the aftermath of the event, the United States found itself putting out fires all around the world. The Caliphate, founded on the strength of superhuman fanatics and their followers, tried to annihilate Israel. China blew up into a popular insurrection and a three-way civil war. Mexico fought and is still fighting a war with its superhuman narco warlords and their private armies. Nearly a decade later, we have troops in Transjordan, the Chinese states, and even northern Mexico, and are hated by fanatics who want to refound communist China, recreate the caliphate, or establish Aztlan, after destroying the American invaders and the popularly elected governments trying to preserve law and order that we've propped up. And since they cannot defeat us militarily, they pursue other options. That's from Professor Charles Gibbons' New Heroic Age. We weren't due back until the third morning, so John showed me all around his cabin and property. We explored miles of pine and high aspen meadows, even a spring-fed waterfall and a mountain lake, now a wonderland of ice. We built a snowman, threw really big snowballs, ate candlelight dinners, talked and kissed and snuggled a lot, but didn't share a couch for the night again. He firmly steered me upstairs to the guest room each night. It felt like our mountain nested inside a snow globe, a late Christmas present, only now unwrapped. Early on to the third morning, we packed and flew back to our labors. There, we learned President Touch's Clouds was flying into Whittier Base. Critics in the media wondered where she'd been all this time, but as her press secretary said, she and her entourage would simply have gotten in the way for a photo op, which didn't mean that she hadn't practically lived in the Situation Room for those first few days. The Army gave her a super soldier escort, including, I saw on TV, Lieutenant Dahmer, the Atlas-type Army Ranger and recruiter who flew out to speak to me in Chicago. They accompanied her by air to disaster camps, supply depots, and temporary bases around Southern California as she met and talked with everyone she could. Through it all, speculation about who had triggered the quake and what to do about it filled the news channels. The biggest topic of debate was the proper response. Some people talked about a comprehensive federal registration system and close monitoring of superhumans with potentially catastrophic powers, but others called for the internment of anyone with powers of mass destruction whose politics or history seemed questionable. There were no serious anti-superhuman protests yet, with so many capes visibly working hard to aid the recovery, but Blackstone pointed out it was only a matter of time. Atlas and I went with Riptide to LAX to see his nephew off. A bed in the children's hospital in Salt Lake City waited for little Carlos, and Riptide planned to join him there once they'd need him to bring the camp's water. While we were gone, he'd learned his sister and mother had died when their apartment building collapsed, leaving him the boy's only family that was north of the border. Dad decided to head home for the day. Dad decided to head home the same day. There'd be work here for super strong heroes for months to come, but he needed to get back into the office, and plenty of others remained. We managed to find a screened lounge area, empty after a recent departure, and I put all my strength into the hug. In his Iron Jack form, he could take it. "Ooh," he said. "Wuss." I dropped my head to his broad shoulder and sighed. "Your mother says you've been light on your texting. Anything for me to tell her?" "Lots for me to tell everybody. Dad." "Atlas tells me you can certify any day now." "Yes, but—" I raised my head and smiled. "You guys are talking again?" He shrugged massively. "Past few days. Your mother and I are very proud of you." "Whatever I decide?" He rapped my forehead with a knuckle. "There's never any question of that. We've always only wanted you to be safe. Safe as you can be in this world, anyway. Whatever you decide, we won't fight you." I laughed. "Pinky swear?" And so he did. A bunch of the Chicago CAI capes went back with Dad, and FEMA slated us to go home the next week as more and more Army reservists and National Guardsmen poured into the state to replace our powers with numbers and equipment. Things were coming together. Then the ring hit us. The alarm caught me and Atlas sharing a canned meal in his room. All teams, Whittier base is under attack. Repeat, Whittier base is under attack." I paled. The president was still there due to fly out in the morning. Out of our chairs and into the hall before the alert died, we ran into Riptide. He'd been given an earbug of his own for the duration. The rest, except for Chakra, probably already on the floor of her room in lotus position and chanting mantras to prepare, piled into the hall. At a signal from Atlas, Rush headed down, and the rest of us headed for the roof 2 flights up. Nimbus disappeared, flashing ahead. Rush had liberated a motorcycle. Racing through a time-frozen world, he'd get there long before any of us, except Nimbus. On the roof, we loaded up, Atlas gripping Ajax's armor, while Quinn climbed on my shoulders. Riptide grabbed Atlas's arm. "I'm in this fight," he said. Atlas didn't hesitate. "Need a ride?" "Hardly." He grinned and transformed into a spout of water before our eyes, leaping up and away. That got a blink. He'd been holding out on us. Artemis missed it and flew, but neither she nor Riptide could keep up with us. We flew south through the night, towards the rolling explosions. Looking ahead, I could see the skeletal tail of a cargo plane sticking from a shattered prefab building, and half the base seemed engulfed in flames. Strobing flashes lit the low clouds, and staccato of automatics, the ripping fire of machine guns, beat our ears. We flew low as our earbuds chattered, spelling out casualties and hotspots. Then the chatter died, jammed. We landed by the fence at the north edge of the burning camp to find Blackstone and Rush waiting for us. Nimbus had already gone in, and her photonic lenses lit the smoke. "President was staying in the South Barracks," Atlas yelled over the explosions. Fireballs lit up the night, and it sounded like ground zero at a fireworks plant. "What are we facing?" "At least 30 superhuman Johnnies, all types," Rush yelled back. "We're down to a handful of super soldiers, bits of a division, and the president's detail." He shook his head. "Landed a freaking plane on the camp. Don't know why, but her guys didn't get her away. She's in the open on the south side of the base, and her detail's got a shield around her. Dead Johnnies everywhere, but some giant dude's eating our side for breakfast. Rest of the bad guys have formed an outside perimeter while the big guy finishes the job." Atlas nodded as the others flew in. He gave me an unreadable look. "No other teams are close yet, but we can't wait. So, Ajax, Riptide, Artemis, and Blackstone, Rush and Quinn, me and Astra. Stay together, fight for the center. Our mission is to extract the president at all costs. Havoc Protocol." Blackstone waved and his cane disappeared, replaced by pistols. He passed 2 to Artemis, who dumped her E-lasers, then gave 1 each to Quinn and Rush, and finally conjured 1 for himself, Spare clips followed. I watched them load up, focused on my breathing, tried not to think. Havoc protocols meant deadly force with no restraint. Stop them now and stop them hard. I crossed myself. Hail Mary, full of grace. Atlas took one last look around, then nodded sharply. Johnny's called to dance, and it's a barn burner. Let's make ourselves troublesome. Artemis misted away, and Blackstone ported in quick hops as far ahead as he could see. Rush grabbed Quinn and disappeared. Ajax leaped forward in long bounds, riptide a moving cloud of spray beside him. Atlas and I simply threw ourselves over the fence and into the smoke. And directly in front, and moving with me, I saw the anarchist, or a ghostly image of him. Do what he says, the phantom called to me, as clear as if he were right beside me, or speaking through my dead earbud. Then he was gone. I almost fell out of the air, but Atlas didn't twitch. He hadn't seen anything, and I shook my head. We flew into madness. This does go where I think it does. I was wondering if this was in the second book, or if we are about to see who we see here. We do see who I'm expecting to see here. I was like, the whole time, I was like, was that in the first book or the second book? It's in the first book. We're about to see it when we get into part 9 here. One more thing I have to promote. I also have a YouTube channel, which, surprise, I'd forgotten to schedule a few VODs. So this Saturday, we're going to catch up on that a little bit. The VODs that I forgot to schedule are going to drop alongside the expected Saturday single VOD. The videos are a little ways behind the main podcast feed, but I'm working hard to catch up as fast as is feasible. Although, to be honest, I might make some programming decisions on the fly there. But regardless, if you like what we do here and you want to see more, my YouTube is a fantastic place to do that. Over there, I am Glacier Nestor without the underscore. That's GLACIERNESTER. So do feel free to catch up on the backlog there. It's not just paper cuts either. It's also all sorts of other streams, mostly Tuesday night streams where we play video games. But I also have, on occasion, decided to pick up a solo tabletop RPG and tell some stories of my own. And, we occasionally do some making, some mending, some fixing. At one point, I opened up a PlayStation controller and fixed some trouble it was having. I fixed up my clothes a little bit. We might eventually, if I wind up grabbing a few things in the right way, we might wind up making some door protectors for the cats. Because, Library has a bit of separation anxiety sometimes. He gets nervous when doors are shut, and, we don't want him causing any problems that aren't allowed, But I digress. Long story short, if you like what we do here, the YouTube channel has 99% of the backlog. Part 9, Chapter 39. I dreamed, and in my dream I found Aladdin's lamp of old, and the fearful Jinn I released bowed to me and asked what my heart desired. Fame, riches, power, and palaces, the most beautiful women in the world. And I said to the Jinn, I wish to be a sword in Allah's hands, to smite the unbelievers, to bring sorrow to the house of war, that they may weep, knowing that God is great. And the Jinn laughed, and burst forth brighter than the sun that blinds to look upon, and revealed himself to be an angel of unspeakable beauty. And he breathed upon me breath with the sense of paradise, so that when I awoke, I'd become the sword of the faith, Sif al-Din, sword of the faith. Yep, that's who I was expecting. I couldn't tell the difference between a Palestinian and a Persian, let alone a Syrian and an Egyptian, but I knew a jihadist when I saw one. Heads swathed completely in black cloth over military fatigues, good clue. So are the screams of Allah Akbar, God is great. But I also heard cries of Mexico Libre and something Chinese. Seeing their positions, Atlas dropped lower and accelerated, grabbing a tipped Humvee to carry before him and shouting to me. Right. Unknown enemies, unknown capabilities. Assume they can hurt you. I tucked in behind him. AK-47s chattered and energy discharges burned the air. Then a shout from a throat as big as the world shredded our improvised shield. Atlas simply dropped the rest of it and followed it down, as Riptide coalesced from flying spray and fell on them like the world's biggest water balloon. To our right, Ajax bounded through the fight and kept going, Nimbus popping in and firing her photonic lenses ahead of us to clear a path. Each shot burned down a screaming invader. Then the shout struck again, not so ear-shattering since it wasn't pointed at me. The wall of the brick building behind Nimbus exploded into dust, and Nimbus disintegrated. I screamed and saw a head turn toward me and uncovered mouth open. Then I fell. Unshielded, the shout went beyond sound to flay my skin as my muscles tried to liquefy. Looking up from the dirt, I saw red and realized my eyes were bleeding. The shouter drew another breath. I threw myself at him, catching him mid-inhalation. He folded over me, bones snapping like I'd smacked into a bundle of dry twigs, and bounced back and into a jeep to slide limply to the ground like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Acid rose in my throat, nausea fighting the singing in my blood, but I kept going. Atlas finished his group by throwing a truck through their position, following it in. He flew ahead of me as electric and plasma bolts reached out from behind us among the storm of bullets. We broke through the ring into a calm space occupied only by the dead and dying, and found the center. Blasted and burning vehicles littered the shattered compound. A smoky light illuminated dead and moving bodies and shattered buildings. It looked like a scene from hell. Ajax and Blackstone had beaten us. Blackstone, already hit, sat propped against the glowing dome that covered Touch's clouds in her protector, firing away with calm precision. His mouth moved as if he were talking to somebody. Ajax had engaged the giant. I recognized him from media coverage of the Caliphate War. Saif al-Din, the great Islamo-fascist martyr. Martyrs were supposed to stay dead. The Sword of the Faith stood 10 feet tall, the shadows of enormous angel wings rising from his back. His skin glowed in undulating spots of bright and dim light, looking like the surface of the sun. Towering over Ajax, he swung a burning sword bigger than I was. Each impact shook the air. Somehow, Ajax stood up to him, though the ground jumped with the shock of each hit he took on his ringing maul. Saif al-Din so far outreached him, he didn't even try to strike back. Around them lay broken defenders and attackers, while the others fought on, ignored by the two locked titans. Then Ajax went down, ball shattered, the great flaming sword in his chest. Beyond screaming, my breath punched out of me. Engage anyone but the sword, Atlas yelled at me before launching himself to strike Saif al-Din from behind with a sound like cannons. The Sword of the Faith staggered, but didn't fall, and he turned. I darted in, ignoring friendly fire, to grab a fallen flagpole, and swung it like a baseball bat at a group using a Humvee as a shield. They went down, with the exception of an Ajax type who bounced off the armored transport and came at me, only to get burned by a bolt of energy from out of the smoke. Then I felt chakra like a fragrant wind in my mind, channeling Blackstone's thoughts to me. Astra, get the president now. I'll give you cover. I looked back and saw the force field flicker. Dropping the pole, I shot in as the barrier died. Grabbing the president and the sagging agent with her, in one shoulder fireman carries, I went up, trusting Blackstone to cover us with his illusions as he had over Chicago. Below, I heard a scream of rage, Saif al-Din bellowing his fury. Enemy fire burned and shook the air around us as I rose in an arc to the west. Breaking through the smoke, I dropped low and accelerated, desperate to get out of range before Blackstone's protection failed. And through my link with Chakra, I could feel it. Blackstone dying. I could almost see it. The gallant old gentleman emptying his pistol even as he bled out, fighting to stay, to shield us long enough to make our escape. "Stay with me," I begged. "I need to know what's happening." Somehow he did, as I flew through the night almost at ground level now, then at wave level, till my target loomed ahead of me, the USS Nimitz, in port with her carrier group and hospital ships. As it grew in front of me, I saw the titanic struggle behind me through Blackstone's eyes. Somehow Atlas had disarmed the burning colossus and kept him from following me, but he struck at Atlas again and again while Riptide pulled water from the ruptured pipes to fountain into obscuring clouds of steam off of his blazing form. Between the steam clouds and Atlas's fleetness, few hits landed, but the ones that did fell with the impact of exploding hammers as I flew onward. Flashing over the water, frantically calling ahead as my earbud connection came back up, I pulled into a wrenching climb to bring myself to the carrier's flight deck. Dropping my passengers flat on the deck, I stood between them and the stunned sailors as I shouted out who we were. Finally sure we weren't going to receive defensive fire, I stepped away, launching myself skyward before the president could even climb to her feet. Do what he says, the anarchist specter had warned me. How? I didn't know and didn't care. Atlas had told me to engage anybody with a sword, and somehow I knew exactly what had happened. In one of the anarchist's probable futures, I'd fought Sifaldine and died. But Atlas was the one dying now. I climbed straight up while the battle raged below me. Even as more heroes from the surrounding city poured into Whittier Base, the Hollywood Knights among them, I watched Atlas through Blackstone's eyes as he fought on under Sifaldine's blows. Atlas was America's strongest superhuman. I could flip a tank, but he could throw one. In our sparring matches, he'd always restrained himself from using his full strength, but he could smash bunkers. Sifaldine, though, was stronger. Two war gods locked in combat, their blows landed with an explosive force that shook the earth and air. Atlas moved faster, but his hits only rocked his colossal opponent, while Sifaldine's hits hammered him. Still, he held his own until the shining giant broke his arm. I saw him, felt him scream. Hitting the clouds, I turned. "Chakra," I cried with my soul. "Guide me in." I felt her understanding and grim acceptance, and dove, as far below me, the sword of the faith grappled Atlas in a killing embrace. On the flight to LA, I had to hold on to John, not capable of half his speed. Now I threw myself down, falling faster than I'd ever flown. The halo orb of vapor formed behind me to press my passage as I broke the sound barrier. Fighting to hold myself on target, I fell from the sky like God's own wrath. "Mass is armor," Atlas said. "If you hit something and don't break it, it'll break you." A missile's only used once, but once was enough. Below me, Sifaldine threw Atlas down, shaking the base, and stomped on his chest. The impact shattered the concrete beneath them. The giant bent and retrieved his sword. I fought through a long turn to come in at a shallow angle, the shockwave of my passage shattering windows into glittering shards along my path. I couldn't see through the smoke with my own eyes, but Chakra's vision guided me in. Fists forward, head tucked, back arched in perfect form, I struck Sifaldine as he raised his flaring blade. The world disappeared in exploding agony, and the force of my strike drove us through two buildings and a vehicle pool. Anyone on our way simply died. I raised my head as my vision cleared. Through the fog of pain, I could barely see Sifaldine as the shining giant lurched to his feet, reaching for me. But, by some miracle, his flaming sword lay by my hand. I scrambled for it, fingers slippery with blood, shattered bones, screaming. I gripped the blade like a ram and launched myself as if I intended to fly to the rising moon. All my power behind that fatal point, it plunged into that enormous chest, and I took the shock on my own broken body. Sifaldine swayed backward like a tree caught in a killing wind, and fell with me atop him as I screamed and pushed. The force of our impact nailed the sword into the ground beneath him, pinning him to the shattered pavement. He stared up at me unbelieving. His hands scrabbled at me as I crouched atop him, then released. He was dead. It felt like I was breathing knives. I'd been broken in too many places to count, but the pain was far away as I flew back to the center of the camp. Atlas lay where Sifaldine had thrown him down. He wasn't breathing, but before I could do more than kneel beside him, I felt Chakra move between us, saw the bloom of energy I'd experienced once before myself, and he opened his eyes, spat blood. Told you to stay away from him. I whispered, smoothing his blood and grime-matted hair. You're gonna be alright. I saved you. That's great. Now shut up. I sniffed. What are we, 10? Mom warned me about you love him and leave him guys years ago, but I swear if you leave me now, I'm gonna kill you. He laughed weakly and smiled. Well, at least I got to the love him part. I'm sorry, now shut up and come here. His good hand stripped off my mask, taking my face down to his, and I surrendered. Taking his head in my hands, I kissed him. A touch first, then more firm as my tears fell on his battered face. I could feel him going, his life draining from his body like wine from a cracked glass, but my kisses never stopped till his eyes closed and his hand fell away. You know what? Reticence rescinded. That was written a lot better than I thought it was. I was sitting here haunted that it was going to be much more, I'll say, impolite in its depiction of the invading force there. Anyway, chapter 40. Saint Michael, defender of man, stand with us in the day of battle. Saint Jude, giver of hope, be with us in our desperate hour. Saint Christopher, bearer of burdens, lift us when we fall. It's an unattributed prayer for heroes. Medics appeared out of the smoke and dropped into our little crater in the next minute, tried to pull him away from me. Ma'am, ma'am, one medic, Corporal Searcher from his name tag, said. You gotta let us take him. He tried to shake me, pleading, almost crying. I nodded. They had to try. I let go, and they pulled him from my arms, laid him out on a stretcher, and strapped him down. In moments, they were gone. Looking around, I saw other stretcher teams moving through the smoke. As I watched, a team strapped Blackstone in and trotted away. Then Seven dropped into the crater beside me. The 2 auto pistols he carried didn't go with his dinner jacket, now well beyond dry cleaning. I thought about pointing that out, but decided he had to already know. Astra, it's all over but the kicking. Every cape in the city's here, and just about all the Johnnies are dead or can't fight anymore. A few are even surrendering. You got the president out? I nodded. The Nimitz. She's on the Nimitz. He hunkered down beside me. Are you all right? That was a hell of a hit. Medic! Another young soldier came scrambling over. He checked my pulse before looking into my eyes. Shit, Ross, we got another one. Seven grabbed his arm. Does she need anything? What does she need? Another stretcher, but if we don't, he said as he laid me down. Seven yelled again, and a stretcher team came out of nowhere, along with a third corporal who leaned over me. His hand came down, and I was gone too. Hell is war. Atlas and I fought back to back, Ajax, Blackstone, and Nimbus fighting beside us until the shining giant rose to scatter us all. Endless screaming hordes threw themselves at us, descended on us, crawling, leaping, flying across the blasted city landscape where shattered buildings burned beneath firelit clouds. We died, and they died with us, bleeding, burned and broken. We stood up to fight them again. Ajax crawled up the sword that impaled him, tore at the blackened and cinder-burnt giant, raging unstoppably among us. Atlas, crushed underfoot, shattered the giant's legs, only to be crushed again when it fell on him. Blackstone emptied his pistol into swarms of gibbering attackers, while he bled out through horrible wounds. Nimbus, scorching the earth with stone-blasting light, exploded again and again. Only this staggering colossus couldn't die, not even once, and he screamed without end, immolated by his own fire while Satan laughed. It'd go on forever. Hope! I knew that voice, but she couldn't be here. It hadn't been suicide. Hope, stop fighting. Fly. How could I? It would be a betrayal. Then I felt a soft hand on my forehead. So bring them with you. And I did, gathering them in somehow. We rose above the scorched and wasted plain of shattered cities, up through red clouds that rained blood and screamed at us. Breaking through, I found myself floating beneath the stars, the full moon overhead shining on a pearl-bright sea of clouds. And I knew I was dreaming. I was alone, but really I had been before, and that was okay for now. The pain, at least, felt far away. Opening my eyes, I really wished I hadn't. If they'd given me drugs, they weren't doing a thing for me now. The whining hitch in my breath attracted attention, and a young medic turned to me, Corporal Searcher. I'd recognize that haircut anywhere, I whispered, and he chuckled. He had only a scrim of hay-colored fuzz. Before you ask, you've been out for 5 days. You were hemorrhaging into your skull and everywhere else, mind you. Corporal Ross dropped you into stasis just in time. You can thank Chakra here for your recovery. Don't give me all the credit. Chakra appeared at the foot of my bed. She looked terrible, face lined, hair lusterless. How bad was I? I tried to get a little more strength into my voice. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You managed to fracture just about every bone in your body and rupture nearly everything else. Stopping the internal bleeding was just the beginning. Ross would bring you up a bit so I could pump you full of Kundalini energy, and then he'd drop you right back down. A gifted psychic surgeon here worked on your insides while you were down. Thank you. I fought to keep my eyes open. Blackstone? She took my hand and squeezed it gently. He's going to be fine. Did you know he's ex-Marines? Retired because he didn't want a desk job after busting up his knee years before the event. He should have gotten out of the field ages ago, but he'll be fine. Everybody else? The Harlequin, Rush, and Artemis came through it without a scratch. Riptide took a hit, but he'll be fine too. Maybe a few dashing scars. Atlas. She shook her head, tears welling up. They tried. I tried. He was too broken. Even worse than you. I closed my eyes. I'd already known, and the look in her eyes almost broke me down, but I'd been here before. Not yet. She squeezed my hand again, bent and kissed my forehead. Her power moved through me in a warm wave, carrying me away from the pain. Go back to sleep, she whispered, and I did. Hope. I opened my eyes. The ward was quiet, even to my super hearing. A dimmed lamp lit the room, and machines beeped sleepily to themselves. Shelley sat, dangling her legs at the edge of my bed, wearing a denim miniskirt and a black t-shirt with white print that read, I killed myself origin chasing, and all I got was the stupid t-shirt. Hey, she said. Oh, great. It broke my brain after all, I whispered. Good to see you anyway. She grinned, an ear-to-ear grin that spelled adventure or trouble. Flipping her hair out of her face, she blew a couple of wild red strands out of her eyes. Why didn't you tell me you had the hots for Atlas? Sure, I wanted him, but I'd have settled for Burnout. You came back to haunt me just to tell me that? She swung her feet and hunched forward over her hands, resting her chin on her shoulder to look down at me. No, silly, I came around to tell you everything's gonna be alright. Have a little faith. I opened my eyes. The ward was quiet, even to my super hearing. A dimmed lamp lit the room, and machines beeped sleepily to themselves. Nobody sat at the foot of my bed. Oh, I've got time. Chapter 41. And on our developing story, fresh details are emerging regarding the terrorist attack on the president at Whittier Base. Tragically, Atlas, Ajax, and Nimbus are confirmed dead, while Astro remains in critical condition. Every night since the attack, mourners and well-wishers have been gathering for candlelight vigils outside the dome, and impromptu memorials of flowers, lights, placards, and other offerings have been left at its doors. So far, there have been 38 confirmed superhuman fatalities among the soldiers at the base, the president's security detail, and the fast-responding superheroes who entered the fight. A still undisclosed number of regular army soldiers also gave their lives defending the president. Chicago News at 5. The next day, they gave me a full-body scan with a portable rig they simply wheeled into my room. I still felt like I'd been beaten all over with baseball bats, but I at least could think straight, and they decided that between Chakra, the surgeon, and my own super healing abilities, I could at least get out of bed. Listening to the news, I finally learned what had just happened. The Ring dumped a manifesto on YouTube right after the attack, declaring themselves a coalition of superhumans from different terrorist and nationalist groups dedicated to striking back at America. The big one and the president's trip had put President Touch's clouds in the middle of the largest concentration of American super soldiers in one place ever, creating an irresistible target of opportunity for their debut. They launched their attack from Mexico, taking advantage of the amazing supply airlift to hijack a cargo plane. One of them ghosted the plane, so it came in invisible to radar. They bailed out as they closed on the base, their flyers supplying airlift like we did, while a Phantom-type superhuman flew the plane, loaded with explosives, into the ground. The impact and resultant explosion flattened the barracks, killing hundreds of completely unprepared soldiers and super soldiers. Before the stunned survivors could mount a coherent defense, the Ring was on them. Whittier Base had hosted 2,000 soldiers in 10 8-man super soldier squads. Caught completely unprepared and blown halfway to hell by an explosive-loaded cargo plane and a rain of armed superhumans, they still managed to rally and put themselves between President Touch's clouds and the Ring. Nearly 800 soldiers and 50 super soldiers fell that night, most in the initial fireball. We were getting the credit for saving the president, but she'd survived only because of the men who'd made a wall of their own bodies. Before anything else, I forced myself to call home and discovered that Artemis had kept the parents and the bees in the loop. I had no idea of the proper phone etiquette for, "Hi, I almost died, but I'm feeling much better now," phone call, but Mom tried very hard not to cry. I did too, so I kept it brief. I couldn't talk to them about John, couldn't think about him yet, if I was going to try and hold it together at all. Quinn brought me a fresh uniform, and I got dressed so I could move around the medical ward. My bathroom had only a small mirror, but even with the clean costume, I knew I looked pretty bad. Fading black, purple, and yellow blotches covered most of my skin, and I'd lost weight with all the fuel my body had been burning in the accelerated rebuild. I looked just about as I felt, hollow inside. I turned to the door. They'd told me Blackstone was recovering nicely with Chakra's help, and his managing physician agreed to let me see him. I wanted to go home so bad I could taste it, but we weren't leaving Whittier Base until we could take him with us. Quinn had an interview set up for me with Peter Harris, a war correspondent who'd been following S1, the Blue Eagles, the super soldier squad hardest hit in the attack. Apparently, the news media was prepared to storm the base to hear from the heroes who'd saved the president, and Quinn settled on Mr. Harris as a solution. Putting my hand on the latch, I found myself wondering if they'd let me see John. Not a good idea. I sat up, covered with bits of concrete and wall plaster. Sirens blared, and I could hear shouting through a big hole in my hospital room wall. Did I do that? Climbing to my feet, I checked myself over. No new damage that I could see, but I was a mess. My head felt funny. I brushed off my cape and leaned out through the hole to wave to the soldiers on the ground. A familiar super soldier landed right in front of me. "Ma'am, are you all right?" "Yes, Lieutenant Dahmer, thank you." What happened? My erstwhile recruiter took off his beret and ran his hand through his blonde buzz cut, peering beyond me into my room. A squad formed up in the yard behind him. You don't know, ma'am? Something hit your building exactly. He looked at a fancy watch. 1 minute and 11 seconds ago at 13:27 hours. I looked at the ground. Most of the mess was in my room, so obviously the explosion had blown inwards. I'm sorry, Lieutenant, I don't remember anything. Then what he'd said sank in, and I nearly sat down on the rubble-strewn floor. Did you say it's 1:30? He looked puzzled. Yes, ma'am. You're not hurt? I shook my head. I'd dressed to leave the room at 8. They secured the scene in minutes, but there was nothing to secure. The wall had exploded inward for no reason they could see. I woken, covered in dust, but unharmed, with no explanation why I'd found myself on the floor with no memory of the morning, but I had a terrible suspicion. They finished checking me out and asking questions and moved me to another room. Before I washed up and changed, I called Artemis. They'd quartered the rest of the team just across the base in the temporary barracks, so she knocked and poked her head in the door as I toweled my hair. I hear you're trashing rooms now. Hang on, let me take that again with Artemis's actual voice. I hear you're trashing rooms now. She closed the door before putting her hood back and peeling off her day suit mask in the windowless room. I startled her with a hug. Thanks for calling home for me. Hey, I'm happy to. Your family's great, and I'm so sorry. What's going on? I sat on the bed with a sigh. I felt disconnected. I'm hoping you can tell me. When we first met, you told me you could do some kind of mind trick to make me forget our conversation. Were you kidding? She pulled up the chair by the bed. Hardly. I use it all the time on my dates so they don't remember their donation. Why? I'm missing the last 5 hours with no trauma to account for it. The orderly said I returned to my room to get some rest about 10 minutes before the explosion, and nobody else went in or out. And somebody I met told me you could erase whatever memories you wanted to. Could you recover memories? I've never tried. She looked doubtful. I don't really understand how my vampire powers interact with other stuff. I took a deep breath. Can you try for me? I think I know. Oh, can you try for me? I think I know what happened, at least part of it. And if I'm right, it's really important that I remember. She shook her head. You don't want me to do that. Really. The truth is that I wasn't serious back there on the club roof. I hadn't planned on doing anything unless you totally freaked out, which you didn't. So why don't I want it? She looked uncomfortable. For it to work, I have to bite you. Oh, I guess that's out, since biting me'd be like biting an armored car. No, I could. It's just very intimate. Now I was sidetracked. But how? Your teeth are normal, aren't they? I mean, they're sharp, but... Artemis laughed humorlessly. Hope even the pointiest teeth wouldn't do what a vampire needs them to do. They'd have to be as sharp as hypodermic needles to cleanly pierce a vein. Forget about closing the holes neatly afterwards so my date doesn't bleed all over the place. So how do you do it? Dr. Beth thinks I have a limited ability with psychic surgery. I mentally drill where my teeth make contact and heal the holes afterward the same way. All that's left are 2 little red bumps and a faint hickey. Oh. Psychic surgery seemed to work on me just fine, so she probably could do it. If it takes a bite to help me remember, I really don't mind. Good thing Quinn had brought me my skirted costume with its high collar today. It covered more bruised skin. You really don't know what you're asking. Artemis disagreed, running her hands through her hair. When I bite somebody, I take away their will. Just long enough to get the job done, but still, I don't want to do it to you. But why? Because you'll remember afterward. That's the whole point. Is it awful? No, Is it sexual? Yes, no, sort of. I'd be really popular if I didn't make my dates forget it afterward. She looked uncomfortable, as if admitting a dirty secret. Even with their memories scrubbed, they leave happy. I pulled my feet up to hug my legs, resting my forehead on my knees as I tried to think. Finally, I raised my head. I think I understand, but I really need to know. I can't tell you why, but I think finding out could, what? I had no way to explain. Seconds ticked by as she looked back at me, and finally she sighed, surrendering. Okay, but you've got to promise not to hold it against me. She looked wretched, and I felt awful. I'd never asked her about that part of her life, so long as she didn't hurt anybody feeding. Really, I hadn't wanted to know. Maybe I thought it would make her too strange. So, what do we do now? You don't need to do anything. She sat on the bed beside me, so I had to look across my shoulder at her. I released my legs to sit up straight, suddenly self-conscious. You're going to let a vampire bite you? No need to be shy. Opening my collar, she took my chin in a cool hand. I let out a shaky breath. This was Artemis. I could do this. I had to do this. Relax. I don't bite. I started to giggle. Better. She smiled, and I realized how close her face was to mine, definitely inside the intimacy zone. I could see my breath stirring her hair, and her eyes were fascinating pools of star-speckled night. They grew as I stared into them. The giggles went away as I grew hyper-aware of my heartbeat and pulse. As I heated up, her hand felt even cooler, a delicious contrast. Her eyes expanded until they were all I could see, her touch everything I could think about. Then her head dipped down, guiding hand moving to the side of my head and the other to my shoulder, and she kissed my neck. I froze and exploded. I didn't gasp. I couldn't move, not even to breathe. Yeah, Gariki is right. There is definitely some Bouchika wow wow music playing in the background. Any motion would have been involuntary anyway. I didn't want to move, didn't think of it, didn't think at all. It wasn't sexual outright, but my entire body glowed and hot liquid poured right from my neck. A hallucination, right? My time sense went away, so that when she lifted her head and her eyes filled my universe again, it could have been a second, a minute, an hour later. Remember. The word vibrated across my skin, echoing in my bones. Remember. A command. It twined myself around my resurfacing thoughts, becoming an impulse, an action as natural as my next breath. Remember. And I did, with a strange and fractured clarity, as if the entire morning had been a picture in stained glass and someone had taken a hammer to it. Fragments of unconnected scenes rose and evaporated as I looked at them, leaving only memories of memories, like bits of a movie. Blackstone, gracious as always, but looking pale and sad. Hallways, chatter, questions and answers with Peter Harris. The anarchist standing unsummoned in my room, yelling. An explosion of familiar, queasy-making blur. A name that beat at my heart. Shelley. I found myself head down over my knees, looking at the floor and breathing like I'd just run a pre-breakthrough mile. The tea-time anarchist? Artemis stood beside me, staring. I must have said something aloud. I nodded. I can explain. Nobody knows what he looks like, who he was, and he was here? She looked stunned, but not the way she should have been. Oh, no. I raised my head. What do you know about him? She stared at the wall for a long moment, and when she turned, she didn't see me. Oh, God, Jackie, you're scaring me. And she was. I'd never seen her not in control, even when she was completely furious. Now she looked at me like she was staring into the pit. I forced myself to unbend and stand, grabbing her arms. Deep breaths. She laughed painfully. I did too when I remembered who I was talking to. I pulled her over until her legs hit the bed, sat beside her and took her hand, not saying anything. Finally, she closed her eyes hard, like someone deliberately erasing an image from their mind. Filling her lungs and looking away, she spoke in a dead, flat voice. Remember what I said about my psychopathic maker? The monster turned me not just into a knockoff vampire, he turned me into his slave. I loved him. The way you felt me now? The way you felt just now? Blood controls. If I'd told you to love me instead of to remember, you would have, at least for a few minutes. Enough of that, it's permanent. I didn't care what he'd done to my family. I'd done it myself if they'd still been alive and he'd asked me to. He called me his little blood slave, and I licked his boots when he pointed at them. He was going to make sisters for me to share him with. I was happy to hear that. I wanted everybody to love my master. I was his dog. Her grip tightened. If I'd been normal, she'd have broken bones. One night, while he was out, a stranger appeared in our crypt. He really appeared out of nowhere, like Blackstone can. Oh no, this is still dialogue. It's just the quotes around crypt threw me off. One night while he was out, a stranger appeared in our crypt. He really appeared out of nowhere, like Blackstone can. He wore a funny-looking long coat and a gray nylon mask, a fancy version of that pantyhose mask you see bank robbers wear in the movies. He pointed something at me, and I was me again. Her mouth twisted. I threw up my last drink and couldn't stop gagging. I wanted to die so bad if I'd have been able to make myself move, I'd have staked myself on whatever I could find. When I was in control again, he told me my beloved maker was going to use me to help him make a whole clan of vampires. That the city would burn on a night when we rose. Hundreds would die while he, my sisters, and I went somewhere else to do it again. Then he handed me a stake, told me I had to live, and he'd be in touch. She finally turned so I could see her face. It was a death mask. You know what I did then. She laughed, a chilling sound. I don't know if I believe in God, but I pray there's a hell for my darling master to scream in till the sun goes out. I went back home, wanted to lie down in the stripped room my mom had died in, and let the sun rise through the window in the morning, burn my house down around the ashes. I couldn't look at her dead face anymore, so I put my head against her shoulder. She flinched and then relaxed. But he found you again, didn't he? I felt her nod. He told me who he was, and said I could make something good out of what had happened to me, that I could balance the scales a little. He gave me money to set myself up. Initial contacts even picked my code name. Sometimes he'd show up with information for me to work on, leads I could develop and pass on to the police. Tipped me off about the villain fight and told me I should make real contact with you. I started, raising my head. That night at the fortress? I don't know if he intended for me to tell you everything, but when you spotted my differences, well, I figured why the hell not. Didn't expect you to stalk me, though. I giggled, then got serious. How do you feel about the bombings? He told me a copycat read his manifesto and stole his name. I believed him. Mad bomber doesn't go around saving vampires from themselves. I was working for him when I ran into you at the convention. I wish I could have told you about it. Well, since we both kept our secrets. I told her everything I knew. She was stunned to learn I'd seen his face, and she'd accidentally fingered him. Well, the twin she'd known nothing about. I only held back the beacon I'd swallowed and the anarchist plan to trap his other half. Obviously, the reverse had occurred. I felt sick remembering how. So he was here, she said when I finished. Why, if you didn't call for him? And the wall exploded. What happened? I swallowed. It was Rush. I tried to pull the pieces together. The anarchist told me his twin helped trigger the earthquake, that he manipulated a borderline psychotic A-class terrakinetic, a guy who, before he'd interfered, would have snapped a couple years from now, tried and failed to destroy San Francisco. Rush appeared when the wall blew in. He stunned him, stunned me, future stuff, I suppose, had a phaser set on stun like TA used on me the first time.
Then he must have locked up my memory the last few hours with another gadget. At 10 to 1 speed, he had plenty of time to stun both of us and go back over the wall into hypertime with the anarchist before the bits of the wall stopped bouncing. No trace. Artemis swore and I nodded. He has to be working for the other one. The wrong anarchist just won. I really felt sick, right down in my still healing guts. Now nobody could stop DA from playing any game he wanted with our future. We couldn't do anything. Atlas, Nimbus, and Ajax were dead. Blackstone incapacitated. Rush a traitor. The active team was down to a worn out mystic, a bouncy acrobat, a vampire, and half healed me. And who could we tell that a supposed terrorist was actually a good guy, that he'd been captured by one of our own working for the real master villain? Rook? Possibly? Rook could be trusted, but just as possibly the Hollywood Knights had been penetrated as well. For one second, I considered calling Veritas and the DSA, but tell them I'd been working with a terrorist on the DSA's most wanted dead or alive list? That he was a really nice guy in need of rescue? Veritas would have to believe that I believed, but would anyone else think it's true? Artemis finally told me to get some rest while she thought about it, and I agreed. Left alone, I sank down on the bed and put my hands over my eyes. Bits of TA's revelations kept bubbling up in my head. The attack on Whittier Base had been an unexpected bonus for DA. The ring would have made their attempt a few months down the road anyway, an attack on the White House. He'd been planning on intervening to shortstop it, but the earthquake and the hole it blew in national security gave them an early opening they simply had to take. He hadn't seen them coming for the same reason he hadn't foreseen the quake. I remembered that much, dragging pieces of memory together, and how sorry he'd been. It felt very weird. Some memories felt like they'd happened years ago, others felt 5 minutes old. They all felt incomplete. And a piece of the memory kept poking at me, unattached to the rest of the explanation TA had given me. Just one word in his voice, and the feeling of the world turning over. Shelley. Shelley, why? He knew my life story, but he couldn't change any of it more than he could have gone back and saved Jackie's parents or prevented the earthquake once it happened. But even with everything else, I kept circling back. I finally assumed the lotus position in the middle of the bed, tried to meditate the way Chakra's book called for. Well, the way they didn't require a partner, anyway. Focusing on my breathing, holding the memory gently, I tried to distance myself from it, peek around its edges. Shelley. I tested her name, saying it like a mantra. Hi, she said. I screamed and fell backwards off the bed. All right. That is a fantastic note to head to intermission on. We're gonna find out how, why, when Shelley is coming back here for right after the break. We'll be out for at most 15 minutes. In the meanwhile, now is a fantastic time to pet your pets, stretch, get hydrated, take necessary meds if it's meds time for you, that sort of thing. Just generally take care of things. In the meanwhile, I'll be out for about 15 minutes, roughly. We'll be playing more of the old time radio shows while we wait. So you can feel free to stick around. Just keep one eye on the stream for when the screen changes, and that's when we're back. Once again, I'll see you in 15 minutes. Nobody explode. The book. Oh, library? What's up, bud? No, you can't go out yet, buddy. Juno is still Junoing. Juno is one of my roommate's cats. One of my roommate's cat. She's a sweetheart, but her and the boys don't get along. Well, her and Magnus get along fairly well, just because Magnus is like, I don't want to interact with you. I'm gonna stay over here. But Library, he doesn't really quite get social cues from cats that are not Magnus. So he kind of gets a little overzealous, and Juno does not care for it, and neither them nor I particularly want to deal with the trouble that arises from that. So we just kind of give them run of the house separately. And
and library starting to look at the door like, let me out. Yeah, come up here. Listen to Dad read, huh? Anyway, the book we're reading. Let's dive into part 10 of Wearing the Cape, chapter 42. You can't cheat death, but sometimes you get encores. Astra interview in 2017. My best friend, dead for 3 years, was standing by the door. She looked as real as life, with flying red hair, freckles, faded jeans, and the same black t-shirt she'd worn in my dream the night before, under a checkered flannel. She looked as real as life, with flying red hair, faded jeans, and the same black t-shirt she'd worn in my dream the night before, under a checkered flannel shirt with the cuffs rolled up. "Geez, Hope," she said, rolling her eyes, "you're one of the strongest people in the world now. How can you still be so jumpy?" I pulled myself up, ignoring the too true comment, and walked over to stand in front of her. She watched, cross-eyed, as I poked her in the forehead, which wasn't there. She was an illusion of some kind. "If I ever find out who's doing this, I'm going to break the bone of their choice." My voice shook. She sighed. "No, you're too late. This double already grabbed him. We don't have time. Let's get this out of the way." She flipped her hair back, tucking strands behind her ears. "I'm Shelley, but I'm not. The anarchist has been planning his endgame for years, and he figured there was a good chance that both of them would get taken out. He wanted to leave some kind of guide to past secrets and future ifs and might be's, even some way of predicting the likelihood of coming stuff without him, so he put together a database on a 22nd century quantum computer to leave behind as a resource." She held up a hand and ticked off points on her fingers. "Fact. The brain is a biological quantum computer. The mind is a quantum field generated by the brain. Fact. The science guys never managed to create a sentient artificial intelligence in the future." She unfocused her eyes as if quoting from memory. "True sentience emerges organically as part of the whole evolved organism. But, fact, a living mind can be copied through its quantum field, run as a dual system until the original mind stops functioning. The mirroring mind stays around as a ghost system. Think of it as identical twins, or the anarchist. Once they were the same person, then they weren't. Fact. When you showed up, fact. When you showed up, the anarchist looked into your futures and decided that you should be the keeper of that system. And it'd be easiest if it was a ghost system of either you or someone you trusted. Fact. He figured having a new spectral you around would be just too woody for words. Duh. So he went back in time and dropped the neural net bioseed in my soda instead of yours. By the time I took up my first and last flight, my quantum mirror was up and running, and I'd been doing my thinking with two brains for years. So, fact, when first me kissed the sidewalk and her quantum field dissipated, became one with the universe, reincarnated, got harp and wings, take your pick. But second me stuck around. The anarchist brought me back to the present and plugged me in. Got it?" I sat with a plop when my legs hit the bed. It was Shelley. Whenever she wanted to talk me into some stupid stunt, she always started by burying me in facts and then dodging while I tried to pick at them. "Last night," I whispered. She rolled her eyes again. "I snuck into your cerebellum, duh. When he found out, he locked me out. I couldn't come back till you called my name, but I've been waiting for hours." "But how?" She grinned. "How many times did Mama Corrigan tell us not to take candy from strangers? Other than Halloween, of course. That pill he gave you was more than a beacon. It was also a bioseed for a neural receiver. Part of it went to your brain to grow and attach itself to your ocular and neural nerves and other bits. Not telepathy, not really. Just lets me appear like this, so only you can see and hear me. He used it himself to give you that warning while you were flying into the fight before. Took a while to grow, which is why he only used it then." And the floating, ghostly anarchist I'd seen. I just shrugged it off as fancy future tech, and, well, it had been. Shelley walked up to lean over me, hands resting on knees. "I can't affect your thoughts, just your senses. Like this." When she ran a finger down my nose, I felt it and scrambled back. Rolling her eyes again, she sat beside me. "I'm sorry, Hope. I really, really am."
She hung her head. Must have been bug nuts crazy to jump. I just got so impatient. When I splatted, the anarchist explained that I was still me and we had to go, but it's so bad to stay and try and make it up to you, but he couldn't change the past, only work in it. I couldn't believe it. Everything she said seemed in line with the anarchist I knew, but too good to be true was far too mild a statement for it. Between the shocks of wild hope and fear, I felt like the top of my head was going to fly off. But Shelley had lost everything, not just her best friend. What could I say? Left me alone? Don't do it again? I forgive you? She had that without asking. Have you told your mom yet? She shook her head. How can I? I can only interact with people electronically or through neural reception. Can you imagine what would happen if I called her up or sent her an email? I hurt her so bad she had to move out of the neighborhood, leave all her friends behind. I think about it every day, but what would I say? I realized I'd reached for her hand. You've got to tell her. I'll help, I promise. She nodded and took a deep breath. Okay, so let's talk about next. And just like that, we'd moved on to another topic. Like always. Right, I said, trying to think. The Anarchist Support Network, there's got to be lots more than just you and Artemis and me. Can you reach him? Easy peasy. Why? Because if the Dark Anarchist interrogates his twin, he'll learn all about his network. Shelley shook her head. You're forgetting about the quantum superposition thingy, you know, those stories about identical twins feeling each other's pains? Bet his evil twin won't hurt him. Well, maybe not. She looked young and uncertain, and I suddenly realized she was still 15. She'd always been the leader, but now I had 3 big years of experience on her. I was the grown-up in the situation. If only we could mount a rescue, but they could be anywhere in time now. Wait, that's not right. Something he'd said. Shelley, does DA's power work the same way? She nodded. Then he can't have taken the anarchist out of the present, can he? He can't take anything nearly as large as a person with him. That's why he sent Rush instead of popping in himself. But I can't hear him anymore, Shelley said plaintively. Feels like it always does when he goes traveling. But he could simply be shielded, couldn't he? I suppose. I jumped up and circled the room, picking things up and putting them down as I thought. The anarchist was still probably in the present, which meant we could mount a rescue if only we knew where he was. He was shielded, so we couldn't find him, but I made the decision that just about finished us all. Grabbing my earbud, I called Artemis. I am remembering things from the second book about Shelley, and it's very fun. Which, by the way, I haven't pointed that out in several episodes at this point. This book is a series, actually. There's a series of 6 books, and I only read the first 2, and an Artemis spinoff. They're really good, actually. I mean, if the other 4 are anything like the first 2, they're really good. I'd heartily suggest them. Maybe even suggest going to your local library for them. Anyway, chapter 43. I love a well-planned mission, and a lot of the actions we take part in are planned, or at least come with chapters of procedures and training specific to the situation. But sometimes the need for an action comes at you cold. No preparation, no precedents, no protocols. Then you can only act from your gut and explain yourself later, if you survive to explain. An Astra interview from 2023. Artemis brought the laptop from her gear. Her daysuit goggles included a fancy heads-up display like Ajax's helmet, and Shelley hacked both goggles and earbud to project an image and talk to her. I was very grateful to not have to try and convince her I'd acquired an invisible, but very real friend, and kept the introduction short. Artemis didn't have much problem believing the anarchist had left as a backup. She'd been Blackstone's apprentice for only a month, but apparently he was big on contingency planning. Absolutely, she answered my question. I can access our internal security, most of it anyway. The really sensitive stuff I'd need Blackstone for. I sighed, relieved.
I barely remembered my visit to him this morning, but he wasn't in shape for anything. What I want you to do is backtrack the telemetry for Rush's gear, his earbug's part of his helmet, which he had on when he blew his way in. Even if you had it turned off, I remember from our orientation, it still should have been linked to our system. Artemis laughed. Yes, we can start with the time of the explosion and follow his trail till it disappears. And not when he's over the wall, but every second he's traveled in real time, no matter how fast, his gear should be traceable. Could you? She already had her laptop open, and as Shelley and I watched, she initiated a secured connection and began opening functions. Got it, she exulted. Got a trace lasting less than 5 seconds here on the base at the time of the explosion. She kept searching. He pops up again outside the base, which must be where he left his bike. Must have been a real bitch hoofing it out with the anarchist over his shoulder. He shows up again in Barstow, probably stopped to refuel, then again just outside of Reno, Nevada. She pulled up a satellite image. He dropped back into real time to open a gate to this dirt road? She scrolled the image along. And the only building at the end of the road is this old airport hangar. Gotta be a safe house. Reno's north and over the mountains, so I don't think it felt the quake much. Anything since? She scanned ahead. No, that's his last signal. Then he couldn't have caught a plane from there. He'd have to do it in real time. I'm willing to bet that we couldn't pinpoint him now for the same reason Shelley couldn't find the anarchist. They were both at a shielded place. So we knew his location. Probably. Now what? Reno had to have at least one CAI team, but what could we tell them? That one of our own had kidnapped a wanted terrorist and we needed to rescue him? No. Artemis watched me, not saying anything. It wasn't fair. I wasn't a leader. I'd followed Shelley and then the bees as a willing accomplice. Worked for my mom, apprenticed under Atlas. I was good at following. At least I knew what Atlas would do. I put my mask back on. Okay, I'm gone. Don't tell anybody about this till I get back. We don't know who else is playing for the other team. Hell with that, I'm coming with you. I can't. But of course, I could carry her. She didn't breathe. She could easily take a full-speed flight with me. I didn't bother to check out, just informed base security that I was going flying so they wouldn't shoot us down. We stopped at the barracks to collect gear, and back outside, Artemis wrapped her arms around my neck, and we were off. I held my acceleration down so she could hang on, but LA dropped out of sight behind us in minutes. But why so fast? Why so fast? Shelley asked as she floated along beside us. Shouldn't we get some of the others in on this? I mean, the anarchists' other contacts, I mean? No time, I shouted over the wind, not that I really had to raise my voice, and she heard me through my own head. We're dealing with a time traveler, and the moment he steps back into the future, he'll be able to see us coming, or where we've been. It's kind of confusing. We just have to hope that he hasn't traveled forward again since telling Rush to make the grab. If he has, we're hosed. I'm hoping he just told Rush what to do, dropped back a few weeks for the trip to the safe house, then came back to the present to meet him there. It was less than 2 hours ago, so we might have a chance at surprise. So there's a plan? Bust the anarchist loose, maybe capture the bad guy? We don't have time for a plan, but you do. I want you to put together an information package, everything that's happened. If we don't, I want you to send it to Blackstone and work with him. Can you do that? No, you're gonna get yourself killed. She had a point. No plan, no backup, no real intel. I mean, this wasn't the comics where the heroes flew to the rescue and busted through the wall of the master villain's secret base to take down his unprepared henchmen, stopping him from pushing the big button. If they were at all ready for excuse me. If they were at all ready for us, we were probably toast. It wasn't fair. I focused on my flying. I know, I finally said, but when you wear the cape, you do the job. I'm sorry. Shelley and I had played at being superheroes, but we'd never imagined last stands or suicide missions. They just didn't exist in the shiny world of heroes. Shelley disappeared, but my earbug remained active to guide me with its chimes. She could have hacked it and shut it down so I couldn't find Reno, so at least she wasn't trying to stop us. I'd make it up to her later somehow. Artemis? Still here? Like you're getting off now. I have a plan, sort of. Bonus. Share with me.
If their powers are the same, then we can take DA if we have surprise. When we get to the old field, can you find some shadow and mist inside the building? If you can grab him first, then knock him out or grab onto him and call for me, then we can actually capture him. Isn't that a little optimistic? No, I'm hoping he's not there. That's not true. I wanted to catch the monster, but the odds of that were slim to don't even think about it. If all we're facing is Rush, you can miss behind him and take him out with a single E-laser shot. I don't care how fast he is. Can't fight what he can't see coming. If we can stun and restrain him, then we collect him and the anarchist, and we're out of there. Good plan since we're a cavalry of two. If there's reinforcements, if you don't think we can handle what we find, then we get out if we can. We find another way. The weather changed as we flew north and east. As high as we were still in the troposphere, so clouds weren't far below. Then we hit a vast wall of cumulonimbus clouds, towering giants marching across our flight path with banners of lightning. When we flew into the storm, our visibility dropped to just a couple hundred yards. Shelley, I called, and she was back. How does it look on the ground? Her eyes unfocused for a second. The Weather Bureau reports a January snowstorm moving through from the west, the worst of the year so far. Wind speeds are over 60, and there are visibility warnings. A lucky break, then. Maybe, just maybe, we could get in without them seeing us coming. If DA hadn't already taken a let's see what happens trip. So, was he paranoid or complacent? We'll see. Shell, whatever happens, I'm glad you're back. Then we dropped out of the clouds. Visibility didn't get much better. Light levels were low, even the infrared spectrum blocked by the sideways flying snow and hail. I slowed, still descending, and swung wide of our unseen target. Coming around to the northeast, I matched speed with the wind and headed in. So far, so good. Not good enough. A flying man emerged from the storm ahead of us, bundled up in jeans, boots, and a heavy coat with a fur-lined Eskimo-style hood. I rolled right and dove, all Ajax warnings coming back to me. Always assume unknown threats can deal with you. Make him reveal himself. Don't make it easy. Something crackled over by my head, and the small hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Shit, what was that? Artemis yelled. I don't know, but it's electrical. I kept my eye to the left, saw the next one coming in. A glowing, crackling sphere. I turned, climbed hard. Ball lightning! That's an electrokinetic! The flyer disappeared below us in the swirling snow. I tried to remember everything I could from Baldwin's guide. An electrokinetic with enough power to create ball lightning usually had complete control over it. The strength of the ball depended on the electrical charge directly generated by the electrokinetic or drawn from surrounding electrical fields. We were directly beneath an electrically active snowstorm. This is so not good. I continued my circle, heart racing. Every nerve screamed at me to bug out, but we were both nearly blind. I could probably see a little further than he could if I saw him first next time. I realized my mistake as 3 balls came screaming in from different directions. Lots of electrokinetics could sense electrical fields, and we just dropped down from a positively charged zone, carrying an electrical charge you could see. The blast from the first ball blew Artemis off my back as my teeth tried to come out of my head. The second blast smacked me like a cosmic mallet, and I felt every muscle in my body try to pull away from my bones. The world turned red and black as I fell, Shelley screaming in my ears, and when the third hit, I felt nothing beyond a hard jolt. I didn't feel my meeting with the ground. I forgot about this guy, actually. I remembered, the thing that's happening right here, but I did not remember this guy. That's the thing, is I'm very well spaced for a what's the word here? I'm really well spaced for a reread because I remember some of the things from this and don't remember others. Like, I remember the broad strokes of the entire story, but I don't remember specific details, so I'm still getting very pleasantly surprised by certain specific details, like Ball Lightning McGee here.
or like the plasma guy. Like I remembered broadly that like something happened after the earthquake, but I didn't remember it was plasma guy. It's just really like it's been very fun to read. One more time, I'd like to promote that this is indeed a podcast. We have an episode dropping tomorrow, roughly noon Pacific time. Uh, I'd heartily suggest checking out the podcast feed if you've liked any of this so far, because really the podcast is cut down from this show. It's been edited to clean up, times that the cats are causing problems, digressions that I felt didn't suit the book, that kind of thing. But I think you'll all really enjoy the direction I'm taking, especially for season three, uh, because part of the change to season three was intentionally making the episodes shorter, so you don't have to block out 4 hours of listening time all at once. We're now shifting to an hour and a half ish episodes, and I think you'll all really enjoy it. So I would heartily suggest going to papercutsbooks.libsyn.com or in your favorite podcatcher and checking out Papercuts. It's the one with the blue snow. The blue snow that's hanging out behind us this whole time. Yeah, that's based on a piece of art that Razmatazik has done for the show. And so if you recognize the background in the photo that comes up for the show, you'll find it. Or search a couple of the books that we've read. If you've been around for a while, you could search Paper Cuts Dracula, Paper Cuts The Time Machine, Paper Cuts A Crystal Age, that sort of thing. Anyway, let's dive into chapter 44, shall we? There's a reason for super teams. The paper, scissors, rock nature of superpowers means that nobody, no matter how tough, can defend against every possible kind of attack. If you've got no support when your rock meets another guy's paper, you're toast. So bring someone with scissors along. Astra, notes from a life. Waking up, I felt like someone had slapped me with an anvil all over. I lay on a steel cot in a dimly lit cement cell, the only light provided by a fluorescent bulb embedded in the ceiling and shielded by thick glass. The narrow cell had a steel door with a shuttered peephole in it and a larger shuttered hatch at the bottom. A toilet, the kind of one-piece toilet and wash basin you see in pictures of prison cells, sat in a corner, and there was a drain in the floor. Captured. I'd been captured. When I tried to move, I met resistance. Looking down at myself, I found wide steel cuffs on my wrists and ankles. They weren't attached to anything, but when I swung myself into a sitting position, I had to push hard. They were a less fancy, perhaps less advanced, version of the restraints the anarchists used on me that first night. Someone had removed my mask with my earbug, along with my boots and gloves. Shelley? Nothing. I drove down the panic that rose in my throat and the remorse. Artemis was dead, and it was my fault. I'd taken her into a fight in the daytime several hundred feet up. She couldn't safely mist outside the daylight, and when she hit the ground, any rupture of her day suit would have been fatal. How could I have been so stupid? I was able to step slowly over the basin. I washed my face while I tried to think. It had to have been a trap from the beginning. Either that, or they'd found out we were coming and decided to lie in wait for us instead of bugging out. Someone at the base, or maybe they'd tapped into the Sentinel's communications system. Could Rush have deliberately kept his helmet with its GPS tracker? No, he erased my memory. He couldn't have counted on my getting it back. Probably Dark Age just popped into the future and saw us arrive. So what now? My mind ran in circles, partly to keep from thinking about Artemis. I'd come apart if I did. I sat back down on the bunk. One thing was certain, I wasn't at the old airfield. They'd have assumed we left some kind of backup, some kind of if we don't come back, here's where we went message, and we had. Shelley. So, here wasn't there, and there'd be no cavalry coming. I was on my own. How could I have ever thought that we could beat a time traveler? I wanted to curl up and cry so badly that my eyes ached and my throat closed, but the cell had to be monitored, and pride helped me lock it down. What seemed like hours went by,
Then I heard the shutters slide open. A pair of eyes peered at me through the door, and a ferret of a man opened it. Nearly as small as me, he had a sharp face and long nose under narrow ice-blue eyes. His short black hair showed a deep widow's peak. He scowled at me. "Cool one, ain't you? You won't be. Come here." I stood up, but didn't step away from the cot. His scowl, the default setting of his face, turned into a leer. He came inside and closed the door. "Now, see, this is my place, and I don't care who you were out in the world. You do anything I say. Anything. Scream all you like." He shoved his hand into my chest and grabbed my heart. I shrieked until my air was gone, and I couldn't breathe to scream as every nerve in my chest was peeled and set on fire. I fell to my knees when he let go. Sobbing, I gasped for breath and tried not to pass out. His hand had passed through me like a phantom or a hologram. He patted my cheek, and I flinched. "Good girl. You should be afraid. Now get up. The boss wants to talk to you." I climbed to my feet, following him out of the cell and down a short hall. There were 3 other doors like mine, but they were all open. Apparently, I was his only guest at the moment. He stepped right through the closed steel door at the end of the hall like it wasn't there, opening it for me. It had no latch on the hallway side. The door opened into a larger room, and my breath caught when I saw its occupants. The tea-time anarchist sat at a metal table, wearing the same cuffs I wore. Rush stood behind him, beside Euphoria. Volt stood to one side, obviously the electrokinetic who brought me down. And the dark anarchist sat there too. He looked just like his twin, though his hair was shorter and he wore a modern and stylish gray three-piece business suit. He didn't look as tired as my anarchist, whose eyes widened when he saw me. "Astra! Dear God!" "Hello, Astra," said the other one, turning in his chair. He frowned at my jailer, who stood so close behind me I could feel his body heat. "Your host here is Ripper, and you know everyone else. Would you care for a seat?" No, but thank you for asking," I said reflexively, trying to keep the shake out of my voice. His gray eyes darkened.
"I am sorry about your accommodations, and about Artemis. I would very much like to know how you recovered your memory and tracked Rush." Mom had taught me it was rude not to answer a direct question, but this time I was okay with it. "Artemis is dead?" Rush blurted. Volt barked a laugh. I nodded, my eyes prickling. "She was with me when a Volt hit us, and we were more than 1,000 feet up." "Damn it," he glared at Volt. "She was spooky, but I liked her." Volt ignored him. "They had to have let someone know their plans," he said to Dark A. "You sure we're safe here?" "Relax, Mr. Andrews," DA said. "Ripper made this place out of a fallout shelter built by a very paranoid man. Even the old entrance is sealed so that, as you've seen, only he can escort visitors in or out. And I've added a few touches myself. It should be completely undetectable. And it better be." Interest penetrated my despair as I observed Volt's arms folded, closed stance. He didn't like not being the leading man in the room. How had DA bought him? Rush looked even more uncomfortable, but Euphoria, resting a hand on his arm, looked as cool as ice. Mom's first rule of social encounters: watch for the relationships. The 2 alphas in the room were DA and Euphoria. I licked my lips. "May I have a drink of water?" DA nodded to Ripper, who reluctantly pulled a bottle from the mini-fridge by the computer station, handing it to me before taking up his too-close position behind me again. He wanted me to be aware of him, and I fought down a creeping shiver as I carefully opened the bottle and took a drink. DA's attention remained on his twin the entire time, as if they were carrying on an unspoken conversation. "You just killed nearly 50,000 people to make a political point," the anarchist said. "I won't do it." Rush paled. Hadn't he known? 100 times that many would have died by the SB virus by the end of the decade, just in America," Dark A countered matter-of-factly.
And they'd have died a lot harder. You'll give me your network. It's the only way you can save Astra. I opened my mouth, and he turned his attention to me. You were going to say don't do it? You were going to say don't do it? Do you really know what this fight's about? He told me you were trying to turn America into a police state. Accurate enough. Did he say why? I shook my head. He only said things were going to get rough. That's one way of putting it. The two of us were able to travel as far as 2100 together. Do you know what the total population was? Less than 2 billion. Over 3/4 of humanity will die of war, famine, plagues, terrorist attacks with WMDs. By mid-century, most existing nations collapse or fragment. Think of it as World War III, the Black Plague, and the Great Depression all at the same time. And the happy ending to the century is just the most probable future. It could have been, might still be, much worse. Studying the future history, we found lots of close calls. He gave me a smile. That's what I'm fighting. I'm maneuvering to establish a strong national government that will be the foundation for a united Western hegemony. One that will attack before it is attacked, one that will impose peace and order on an insane world that's preparing to tear itself apart. By any means necessary? By any means necessary. Imagine if you could go back in time and kill the leaders of the Nazi Party before the burning of the Reichstag, before Kristallnacht, before the war and the death camps. If you could do it and didn't, wouldn't you share responsibility for the Holocaust? I shook my head. No. And why not? I realized I was shaking with rage. I don't give a rat's ass what happens years from now. You're a murdering bastard, and I hope there's a special hell just for you. I dug out the bodies of babies, and you want me to agree with you? You're a bug-nuts maniac. Personally responsible for the death of Mr. Waters' boy, for all the other people you've killed trying to make a better future. You killed the Munchkin. He accepted it calmly, like I'd just told him his tie was crooked, and turned back to his twin. You see, she's completely in your camp. I'd wipe her memory of the past day, assuming I can. Doesn't appear to take. But the network you've set up would pull her back into events. Sooner or later, she'd have to go down, and the later I do it, the worse the result will be. I can keep you on ice, but if I can't control or neutralize your organization, I have to destroy it, starting with her. You have no one but yourself to blame for this one. The anarchist rested his hands on the table and looked at his twin, and the fingers of his right hand twisted strangely. My heart jumped and began to race. Suddenly, I wasn't scared anymore. I knew what he was telling me, and one way or another, it'd be all over in a moment. It was the terrorist leader in Pakistan, wasn't it? You thought if you could take him out, it would prevent the attack, like killing Hitler in 1916. When it didn't, you took out his lieutenants. When that didn't work, you took out the government officials whose cooperation allowed them to set up their operations. And now you've come too far. Any deaths are acceptable if they prevent more death in the future. While he talked, he carefully didn't look at me as I curled the fingers of my left hand in one. The fingers of my left hand in one by one. 4, 3, 2, 1. I dropped my water bottle. Ripper looked down when it bounced messily on the cement floor, and I thrust my head back hard. His forehead caved in like a crushed egg. I did the forefinger twist the anarchist had told me would activate the beacon, and I screamed as a nova bloomed in my guts. My restraints flashed a visual flare of my agony before going dead, and the computer monitor beside me exploded as I lunged, the cuffs irrelevant weights. I grabbed DA's wrist before he could begin to react. In my agony, I was beyond being careful, and he went white with an anguished shriek as his bones ground together. I held on. He certainly wasn't going anywhere. Volt recovered from his shock, lunging forward with a snarl to grab my shoulder, and I wasn't recovered enough to duck. His hand crackled and burned, and the world flared as I shook, but he didn't have the storm to draw on. With my grip on his boss, he couldn't throw the kind of power that would knock me out again anyway. Even so, my vision grayed and sparkled. I felt my heart jump and twitch as he focused the current in a path through my chest and down my leg. He could cook me slowly, despite my incredible resilience, if he didn't stop my heart first. So, I stepped into his grip and punched him. Hit him from my center, fist straight in perfect form as Ajax taught me. He didn't so much fall back as cave in, my fist shattering his sternum and pushing it through his heart into his backbone, snapping it like dry twigs. I stepped over him as he fell, flicking bits of red bone from my hand and dragging the still shrieking anarchist with me. Euphoria raised her hand and started her buzz, and all my pains went far away, the world beginning to float, as I snapped the disc from my belt buckle and threw it, shattering her temple in a splash of blood. She went down without a sound. I turned. Only Rush still stood there, and he'd grabbed the anarchist when his restraints failed with mine. His eyes were wide, but he wasn't standing down. I can kill him before you blink. I looked down at Dark A, hanging from my grip on his wrist and gasping through gritted teeth. I can live with that. So can I, the anarchist said. He touched Rush's forearm with the index finger of his free hand and shot him with a flash of light from his fingertip. Rush folded up, screaming over a charred stump. He pointed at the twin I held, finger flashing again, and Dark A's neck instantly charred into chunky ash. I felt the wash of heat as the room filled with a smell of burned meat. Dropping him, I gagged on rising bile. He fell limply. Please, God, let him be unconscious. The anarchist looked at his smoking and glowing finger blaster. Its disguising skin sheath had blackened and split. He shrugged. I'll be dead in a couple of minutes anyway, as brain death sets in over there. How could you... I don't have much time. Please, listen. He pushed Rush over with his foot and stepped away. If he's still at all like me, then 10 minutes after we die, a micro-nuke in the basement is going to go off and erase all the evidence. Just take Rush when you go, and Euphoria if she's managed to live. The blocked entrance is through that door and at the end of the hall. I was awake when Ripper brought us inside. You should be able to punch your way through, but don't wait around. I nodded, and he sighed. I'm sorry I lied about almost everything. Shelley's my apology. I knew that sooner or later my twin here would move to capture me, and you were only one of the traps I set. You were... He smiled grimly and wiggled his lethal finger. I don't think he ever went as far ahead as I did. Took practice, and he got too focused on the close to now. Still, glad it worked out this way. He carefully lowered himself to the floor, feet straight in front of him. Most of all, I'm sorry I ever looked. Humanity's destiny is beautiful, but getting there, it'll be rough on everyone. You'll just have to do what you can. Shelley will help. You don't deserve this. He laughed, a strangely happy sound. Oh, yes, I do. It was my interference that started this, and he is, after all, me. 50,000 dead is plenty. It's more than past time for me to explain myself to God. Goodbye, Astra, and thank you. He lay back and folded his hands over his stomach. What can you do? 1,000 words broke on the impossibility of the moment, another ending I couldn't stop or look away from. I sat down beside him and took his unburned hand. He smiled and returned my grip, but didn't open his eyes, and I found myself counting heartbeats. Once he opened his mouth to say something, but reconsidered. Then he died, between one heartbeat and the next, in a single released breath. I said the litany for him, asked God to be kind. Now, I just needed to beat a nuclear bomb. Euphoria was still breathing, and Rush had slipped into shock, so I put both of them over my shoulders. Down the hall and up the stairs at the end, I found a cement wall and dropped both of them to punch my way through. It turned out to be a double wall with heavy insulation between the layers, and above that, the dirt took a couple minutes to dig through, since I didn't want to bury my companions. I broke through to find helicopters circling overhead and soldiers on the old runway. Oh my God. The instant I emerged, spotlights lit me up. I waved, then ducked back down to heave Rush and Euphoria out. Shelley! I yelled. She appeared. You're safe, she crowed. No, I'm not. Fully loaded again, I launched myself into the air. Tell everybody to bug out. Now, there's a micro nuke under us. It's gonna blow in maybe 2 minutes. She disappeared. I flew west against the wind, hugging the snow-covered hills, racing to get as much ground between me and the blast as I could. Behind me, I heard shouts and the helicopters peeled away. I agonized. Shelly, are you in the military net? Is anyone on the ground back there still? She popped back in. I'm listening in through Artemis's connection to dispatch, and she passed the warning. Wow, can they move? Yes, she's alive. At maybe 5 miles distance, I dropped us into a ditch. A moment later, the ground thumped like the surface of a drum. It felt like one of the earthquake aftershocks, but that was it. I quickly checked Rush and Euphoria. They were both still alive. I fell back against the side of the ditch, staring at the stars coming out above the thinning clouds. I don't know how many minutes later, a familiar head in a hood poked over the side of the ditch, followed by another familiar head wearing a black beret. You sure you want to enlist? Lieutenant Dahmer said. Think it's less risky? Chapter 45. I have a rendezvous with death at some disputed barricade. When spring comes back with rustling shade and apple blossoms fill the air. I have a rendezvous with death when spring brings back blue days and fair. Adam Siegler, 1915. The funeral procession moved up Michigan Avenue to the mournful wail of bagpipes and the sharp staccato of drums. The day had dawned bright and clear, and the horses pulling the glass-sided hearses blew great clouds in the winter air. The procession began at the Dome, moving down Monroe Street to Michigan Avenue before turning north. Chicagoans in black armbands blazoned with the Sentinel's crest lined the streets every foot of the way, and they watched in silence as we led the teams drawing the flower-draped hearses, the arrhythmic clopping beat of hooves, the only sound beside the pipes and drums. It had been 3 days. 3 days ago, in Reno, the Army team moved with a speed I couldn't believe. Within minutes, they determined that the blast that had vaporized the base underneath the runway had remained impossibly contained. A good thing for Reno, which could have gotten dangerous levels of fallout. Support units arrived and cordoned off the site, which had slumped into a crater, and a medical team attended to Rush and Euphoria, checking me over while they debriefed us. I stopped far short of the full disclosure. I learned then that I owed Andrew a big, wet, sloppy kiss. His daysuit design had held, and as soon as Artemis recovered from meeting the ground at far too many feet per second, she'd called the base through dispatch and yelled for reinforcements. She'd told them we'd gone in pursuit of the tea-time anarchist, and I'd been caught by his minions. The state of emergency still in effect, S-Corp got permission to sortie into Nevada in minutes. The storm passed during the night, and we flew back to Whittier Base the next morning through clear skies. Lieutenant Dahmer flew with us, and Quinn met me with a replacement costume so I could change. It was scary how naked I felt without a mask now. There, we found Blackstone awake and briefed. Between Chakra and the same psychic surgeon that worked on me, he'd been fit to travel, and we'd brought our people home. Al met us at the airport to take custody of his brother's body. I hadn't warmed to him in the months since we'd met, but I'd never seen someone so lost. Now, we wore black versions of our uniforms. Andrew had assembled mine using the formal skirted pattern as soon as the news broke, and the others already had funeral uniforms of their own. Artemis hadn't had to change a thing, just put on an armband. Following the pipes and drums, she and I walked ahead of the team in hearse, bearing Atlas. On our left, Blackstone walked with Chakra, completely against Doctor's orders, his face set and lined as they led Ajax's team. On our other side, Quinn and Rush led the hearse, bearing Nimbus's empty casket. Rush wore a temporary prosthetic under his right gauntlet, and seemed as lost as the rest of us. He swore he'd thought he was working for the good guys, that he hadn't known who his boss was let alone that he'd been the one who'd caused the earthquake, until the anarchist had dropped that bomb into the conversation. Veritas conducted the interrogation, so we had no choice but to believe him, but I still lowjacked him, only releasing him for the funeral. The rest of the city's heroes followed behind. The procession seemed to last forever, but finally we turned onto Huron Street, and then onto State Street to arrive outside Holy Name Cathedral. None of them would be buried there. The dome had its own chapel, where they'd be interred after cremation and a later private service. This ceremony was for the city. The pipes and drums fell silent when we reached the cathedral steps. A trumpet played the heartbreaking notes of taps, then the cathedral bells began to toll in long and measured cadences as we fell in to carry the caskets up the stairs and through the bronze doors. I took the right lead for Atlas, Blackstone behind me since he couldn't take any real weight. The others took positions, 3 on a side, the extra spaces filled by Sentinel reservists and CAI heroes. Dad stood behind Blackstone as Iron Jack. President Touches Clouds and her reconstituted detail waited for us inside. As the organ played, we proceeded up the aisle to place our burdens on the stands waiting for them before the altar, and took our seats. That night, Blackstone found me back in the chapel, where I'd come to pray and say a more private goodbye to John. I'd met John's family, but hadn't told them of our engagement. They'd at least know that we went away together soon enough, and the hounds of the media would be unleashed, but not yet. Not today. The crypt occupied a recessed and marble-tiled section of the east wall, set with plaque-covered niches, marking the resting places of our fallen teammates. The central nook had been occupied by a carved angel, but now it held the beautiful Kuan Yin, Mary of the Pagans. Mom and Dad had secretly bought her as another gift for when I graduated from training. Father Nolan, who turned out to be the Sentinel's unofficial chaplain, had performed the private service. Flanking her, each plaque bore a name and an inscription. Most of the inscriptions had been prearranged. My fingers traced Ajax's plaque. Ego non somnus. I do not sleep. When I talked to his mother after the ceremony, she told me he was a man of deep faith, though he hadn't made a show of it. She also told me that only half of his ashes were here. Tomorrow their family would take the rest home to the family plot where his grandparents were waiting. Part of John was returning to Texas, too. The inscription on his plaque was much longer, a verse from a poem. I have a rendezvous with death, I read aloud when Blackstone laid his hands on my shoulders. Was he sure that he was going to die? Yes, it's one of the reasons that after his divorce he just didn't do relationships. He thought that way, Hope, he continued, gently, because the tea-time anarchist told him he would. My breath caught, and I twisted around to stare up at him. Grief sharpened the planes of his face, and for the first time, his eyes looked old. John had left me a video file in case of his death. I'd had no idea of any of it, but apparently the anarchist showed up in that coat and mask of his 6 years ago, warned John of a massacre planned by Villains Inc. that would have killed all of us. He even showed him a recording of the attack. Can't tell you how disturbing it is to watch your own death. He smiled, sadly. Taking my hands, he held them tight. He kept in touch after that, he said gently. Apparently, in most of the futures he saw, John didn't make it to retirement. Then why? Why did he stay? Oh, God. I shook my head, denying it all, but Blackstone wasn't finished. John said the anarchist dropped by on the day of your breakthrough. He told him you'd be recruited into the U.S. Marshals Service, that you'd be in D.C. for training when the ring hit the capital, that you'd be killed by their leader. Say Valdine, I whispered, and he nodded. The anarchist didn't know if he'd still be in play when the time came to shut that particular one down, so he asked John to keep you in town, as it were. Make you an offer you couldn't refuse. I suppose he felt a special responsibility since it was his twin who made you. He smiled sadly. Almost makes you believe in fate. John pulled you into the team to keep you out of the DC fight, and we wind up meeting them ourselves, ahead of schedule even. From the first day, the anarchist had been bending my destiny. In another future, I died, but the Time War spared the little sidekick, taking our greatest hero instead. Taking John. It's not fair. And then I broke down. I'd been strong since waking up in the base hospital, knowing from experience what would happen when I finally let go. Now that my knees hit the cold marble floor, Blackstone, still holding my hands, knelt stiffly and pulled me into his arms as I fought for control. I'm sorry, Hub. John called us the night you left for his cabin. I was happy for my friend. Happy for the both of you, even. Tomorrow, I'd help the others rebuild the team. Tomorrow, I'd tell my family everything, face the media circus my life was about to become. I'd be strong. Tomorrow. But there in the chapel, held by John's mentor and brother in arms, I wailed like a lost child. Last but not least, here we have an epilogue. Spring has returned with rustling shade, and the cherry trees that ring the dome are blooming. I found and memorized the poem John chose his memorial verse from, especially the lines about it being much better to be deep-pillowed in silk and scented down. My best dreams are of the cabin. Dr. Mendel thinks memorizing a poem written by an English soldier who absolutely believed he wasn't going to survive a war is a morbid exercise, but I have reasons. Shelley and I spent weeks looking at all the ifs and maybes in the anarchist files, and I understand why he told John he probably wasn't going to make it. A storm is coming. Its gust front is already here, and when it breaks, the only question is whether it's Armageddon or Ragnarok, the world's end, or the beginning of a new one. The only thing I'm certain of is that I know the answer to my question from the day of the funeral. I know why John stayed. The Sentinels didn't choose their motto, "We stand ready," until after John met the anarchist. Then it quietly went on their seal. Quinn once called John the last cowboy, and it fit. A son of Texas, if there was going to be a last stand at some Alamo somewhere, the only place he could be was on the wall. So I no longer wish I could wish that September morning away, and I'm not going to Hollywood or becoming a part-time reservist cape like Dad. When the storm comes, I'll be ready. When you wear the cape, you do the job. And I'm a sentinel after all. It's what we do. From the Journal of Hope, Corrigan. Indeed, like the text says here, there is more to this series. There's a whole 6-book series that we've now read one of on stream, and I only read Villains Inc. I heartily suggest if you liked this the slightest bit, definitely go bother your local library and pick up Villains Inc. I would also heartily suggest that you go pick up the Wearing the Cape Fate setting. Because, fun fact, this is actually a role-playing game setting as well. It's not just this deep because the author wanted to really expand on things. This is also a tabletop RPG setting. And honestly, I've never played a Fate game before, right? But I've heard really good things about Fate as an engine. And knowing what I do about this setting, I think not only me, but you all will also really very much enjoy it. Very many thanks to Marion G. Harmon for allowing me to read this on the show. Author permission is often a very fiddly thing for me to acquire, so I really always appreciate it when it is possible for the author to allow me to read something like this. As much as I absolutely adore the public domain and the joys that it has for me, it's really nice to take some modern perspectives on things. And this is a really good example of, you know, the difference in a book that's written, oh my gosh, 13 years ago already? That's wild. Um, so much more recently is, the setting aside, the salient issues that it was commenting on, the salient issues of its time that it was commenting on being something that we as a viewer probably knew about. Uh, the way that the main character, the point of view character is written is so very different, even from books that were intended for this same sort of age group from, the time of the public domain. It's just a completely different angle on things, and I think it really reveals a lot about our expectations, not only for the media that we consume, but also the worlds that we imagine as a result of the media we consume. Um, I could really carry on about how, like, the sitcom is a remarkably adept gauge on the average take on certain social stances, or what people expect to be able to do in their average day-to-day life. Or I could carry on about how valuable superheroes can be in a world where there are plenty of mundane terrors, so we need something to be able to swing and stop some of these mundane terrors at the very least. We could dig into the X-Men and how superheroes give us an angle to fight oppressions that are normally too abstract to tackle. I could really carry on, but needless to say, this book was fantastic, and it's been absolutely fascinating to read it in in the present day in comparison to when I read it, as a much younger man with a much different view on the world. So once again, many many thanks to Marion G. Harmon for allowing us to read this, because it's fantastic. And honestly, I'm probably gonna reread Villains Inc. in my own time and then grab more of the series from the library. And I'd heartily suggest you do the same if you are, especially if you are not in a position to buy the book. Go to your local library. It's really easy, I promise. Signing up for a library card is 99% of the time, speaking from experience, just handing them an address that you can get mail at, and basically, as long as that's within their jurisdiction, they will hand you a library card and be like, all right, here's your library card. Check out books. And you can set up, depending on your library. So here's the thing: is most libraries I go to, they have two digital collections, one in Libby and one in Hoopla, and it depends on the library whether they have more in Libby or more in Hoopla. For example, the library back from my hometown, their collection is almost entirely focused in Libby. Um, and there's some differences on the back end that make it why this happens. But in comparison, my current local library focuses much more heavily on their Hoopla collection. And it's an administrative thing. There's a lot of ins and outs that I could dig into as to why libraries do that, but I promise you, digital lending is as easy as opening an app on your phone and clicking the right buttons and being occasionally willing to wait on holds for very popular books. I promise there's plenty of less popular books that you don't have to wait around on holds for very very widely dispersed. Um, okay, I've gotten on my soapbox about the library. I think, how much time do we have left here? What time is it? I've got
Uh, I've got about 30 minutes, so I'll tell you what. Speaking of the public domain, I think we're going to dive back into the issue of Astounding Stories that we have been reading uh, off and on between when we have a little bit of extra time on the show. So let me refamiliarize where we are here because it's been a little bit. I need to refamiliarize myself, I should say. Okay, so this was the science cult, right? Hang on. Yeah, this is the science religion one where like this Benda guy gets a letter from one of his friends and like the science community is like up in the hills and it's like a big cult compound and eventually it's revealed that like there are a good sized volume of people who want to be not here but they can't leave for some reason, probably the lack of transit because like everything is super focused on public transit. Yeah, and then they're essentially like painting themselves as scientific evangelists. Yeah, I remember this. And like it's basically a technocracy in no small words. Yeah. Essentially, they're trying to make like the most efficient community as possible. Picture Epcot, but if a cult owned it, trying to run at maximum efficiency. They are currently trying to basically install their uh, city planners and technical experts in cities all over the world to try and essentially spread the influence of the science community and this guy Rohan uh, through, to put it bluntly, psychological operations, rather than having to go out into the world and raid these cities and take them over. They're trying to take them over peacefully. I believe is the idea here, and our main character has just been blackmailed into going all along with this, as I recall. Or maybe he was planning a resistance? Something along that line. We'll find out as we dive into part 3 of the science community, the cipher message, related by Peter Hagstrom, PhD. Benda conducted me personally to a room very much like an ordinary hotel room. He was glad to see me. I could tell that from his grip of welcome, from his pleased face, from the warmth in his voice, from the eager way which he hovered around me. I sat down on a bed, and he on a chair. "Now tell me about it," I said. The room was very still, and in its privacy, following Benda's demonstrative welcome, I expected some confidential revelations. Therefore, I was astonished. There really isn't much to tell," he said gaily. "My work is congenial, fascinating, and there is enough of it to keep me out of mischief. The pay is good, and the life pleasant and easy." I didn't know what to say for a moment. I had come there with my mind made up that there was something suspicious afoot, but he seemed thoroughly happy and satisfied. "I'll admit I treated you a little shabbily in this matter of letters. I suppose it's because I've had a lot of new and interesting problems on my mind. It's been hard to get my mind down to writing letters. But I've got a good start on my job, and I'll promise to reform." I was at a loss to pursue that subject any further. "Have you seen Smith and Francisco?" He nodded. "How do they like it?" "Both are enthusiastic about the wonderful opportunities in their respective fields. It's a fact. No engineer has ever before had such resources to work with on such a vast scale and with such a free hand. We're laying the framework for a city of 10 millions, all thoroughly systematized and efficient. No city in the world like it. It's an engineer's dream of utopia." I was almost convinced. There was only the tiniest of lurking suspicions that all was not well, but it was not powerful enough to stimulate me to say anything.
but I did determine to keep my eyes open. I might as well admit in advance that from that moment to this time when I left the science community 4 days later, I saw nothing to confirm my suspicions. I met Smith and Francisco at dinner, and the four of us occupied a table to ourselves in a vast dining hall, and no one paid for the meal nor for subsequent ones. They also seemed content and talked enthusiastically of their work. I was shown over the city, through its neat, efficient streets, through its comfortable dormitories, each housing hundreds of families as luxuriously as any modern hotel, through its marvelous factories where production had passed the stage of labor and had assumed the condition of a devoted act of worship. These factory workers weren't toiling, they were worshipping their god, of whom each machine was a part. Touching their machine was touching their god. This machinery, while involving no new principles, was developed and coordinated to a degree that exceeded anything that I had ever seen anywhere else. I saw the famous science temple in the shape of a huge dynamo generator, with its interior decorations, paintings, carvings, frescoes, pillars, all worked out on the motive of machinery, with its constant stream of worshippers in blue serge, performing their conventional rites and saying their prayer formulas at altars in the forms of lathes, microscopes, motors, and electron tubes. You haven't become a science communist yourself? I bantered Benda. There was a metallic ring in the laugh he gave. They'd like to have me, was all he said. I was rather surprised at the emptiness of the large and well-kept park to which Benda took me. It was beautifully landscaped, indeed, but only a few scattered people were there, lost in its vast reaches. These people seem to have no need of recreation, Benda said. They do not come here much, but I confess that I need air and relaxation, even if only for short snatches of time. I've been too busy to get away for too long, but this park has helped me keep my balance. I'm here every day for at least a few minutes. Beautiful place, I remarked. A lot of strange trees and plants I never saw before. Oh, mostly tropical forms, common enough in their own habitats. They've got steam pipes under the ground to grow them. I've been trying to learn something about them. Fancied me studying natural history. I've never cared for it, but here, there's no such thing as recreation. I've become intensely interested in it as a hobby. I find it very much of a rest to study the plants and bugs. Well, why don't you run up to New York for a few days? Oh, the time will come for that. In the meanwhile, I've got an idea all of a sudden. Speaking of New York, will you do me a little service, even though you might think it's silly? I'll do anything I can, I began, eager to be of help to him. It's been somewhat of a torture to me to find so many of these forms which I'm unable to identify, Benda continued. I like to be scientific even in my play, and reference books on plants and insects are scarce here. Now, if you would carry back a few specimens for me, ask the botany and zoology people to send me their names. Oh, fine, fine. I've got a good-sized pocket notebook I can carry 'em in, I exclaimed. Well, then, please put them in the order which I hand them to you, and send me the names by number. I'm pretty thoroughly familiar with them, and if you'll keep them in order, there's no need for me to keep a list. The first is a blade of this square grass. I filed the grass blade between the first 2 pages of my book. The next is this unusual-looking pinnate leaf. He tore off a dry leaflet and handed me a stem with 3 leaflets irregularly disposed of it. Now leave a blank page in your book. That'll help me remember the order in which they come. Next came a flat insect, which, strangely enough, had two legs missing on one side. However, Benda was moving so fast I had to put it away without comment. He kept darting about and handing me twigs of leaves, little sticks, pieces of bark, insects, not seeming to care whether they were complete or not, grass blades, several dagger-shaped locust thorns, cross-sections of curious fruits, moving so rapidly that in a few moments my notebook bulged widely, and I had to warn him that its 100 leaves were almost filled. Well, that ought to be enough, he said with a sigh after his lively exertion. You don't know how I'll appreciate your indulging my foolish little whim. Say, ask something of me. This is nothing. Take it right over to the botany department. In a few days, you ought to have a list of names fit for a Bolshevik. One important caution. If you disturb their order in the book, or even the position on the page, the names you'll send me will mean nothing to me. Not that it'll be any great loss, he added whimsically. I suppose I've become a sort of fan on this, like the businessmen who claim that their office work interferes with their golf. We walked leisurely back toward the big dormitory. It was while we were crossing a street that Benda stumbled, and to dodge a passing truck had to catch my arm and fell against me. I heard his soft voice whisper in my ear, "Get out of this town as soon as you can." I looked at him in startled amazement, but he was walking along, shaking himself from his stumble and looking up and down the street for passing trucks. "As I was saying," he said in a matter-of-fact voice, "we expect to reach the 1.25 million mark this month. Never saw a place grow so fast." I felt a great leap of sudden understanding. For a moment, my muscles tightened, but I took my cue. "Remarkable place. One reads a lot of half-truths about it. Too bad I can't stay any longer." "Sorry you have to leave," he said in exactly the right tone of voice, "but you can come again." How thankful I was for the 40 years of playing and working together that had accustomed us to that sort of teamwork. Unconsciously, we responded to one another's cues. Once, our ability to play together had even saved my life. It was when we were in college and we were out on a cross-country hike together. Benda had suddenly caught my hand and swung it upward. I recognized the gesture. We were cheerleaders and worked together at the football games. We had one stunt in which we swung our hands over our heads, jumped about 3 feet, and let out a whoop. This was the stunt that he started out there in the country where we were by ourselves. Automatically, without thinking, I swung my arms and leapt with him and yelled. Only later did I notice the rattlesnake over which I'd jumped. I had not seen that I was about to walk right into it, and he noticed it too late to explain. Flash of genius suggested the cheering stunt to him. "Communication's a science, you know," he had said, and that was all the comment there was on the incident. So now I followed my cue without knowing why nor what it was all about, but confident that I should soon find out. By noon I was on the bus, on my way through the pass, to meet the vehicle from Washington. As the bus swung along, a number of things kept jumbling through my mind. Benda's effusive glee at seeing me, and his sudden turning and bundling me off in a nervous hurry without a word of explanation. His lined and worried face, and yet his insistence on the joys of his work in the science community. His obvious desire to be hospitable and play the good host, yet his evasiveness and unwillingness to chat intimately and discuss important things as they used to. Finally, that notebook full of odd specimens bulging in my pocket, and the memory of his words as he shook hands with me when I was stepping into the bus. "Long live the science of communication," he'd said. But otherwise he was rather glum and silent even. I took out the book of specimens and looked at it. His caution not to disturb the order and position of things rang in my ears. The science of communication. 2 and 2 were beginning to make 4 in my mind. All the way on the train from Washington to New York, I could hardly keep my hands off the book. I definitely abandoned the idea of hunting up botanists and zoologists at Columbia. Benda was not interested in the names of these things. The book meant something else, some message, the science of communication. I have a guess. Honestly, I expected the scientific names to matter. I feel like this guy was intentionally leaving out sections of each little specimen that he was putting in the book to suggest like, move X amount of characters forward in the name of this thing to have this specific letter, to have that specific letter. But that's just a guess. That suddenly explained all the contradictions in his behavior. He was being closely watched. Any attempt to tell me the things he wanted to say would be promptly recognized. He had succeeded brilliantly in getting a message to me, but now my part was to read it. I felt a sudden sinking within me. That book full of leaves, bugs, and sticks, how could I make anything out of it? There's the Secret Service, I thought. They're skilled in reading hidden messages. Must be an important one, worthy of the efforts of the Secret Service, or he wouldn't have been at such pains to get it to me, but no, the Secret Service is skilled in reading hidden messages, but not as skilled as I am in reading my friend's mind. Knowing Bender, his clear intellect, his logical methods will be of more service in solving this than all the experts at the Secret Service. I barely stopped to eat dinner when I reached home. I hurried on to the laboratory building and laid out the specimens on white sheets of paper, meticulously preserving order, position, and spacing. To be on the safe side, I had them photographed, asking the photographer to vary the scale of his pictures so that all the final figures would be approximately the same size. Plate 1 shows what I had. I was all a tremble when the mounted photographs were handed to me. The first thing I did was to number the specimens, giving each blank space also its consecutive number. Certainly no one could imagine a more meaningless jumble of twigs, leaves, berries, and bugs. How could I read any message out of that? Yet I had no doubt the message concerned something of far more importance than Benda's own safety. He'd moved in this matter with astonishing skill and breathless caution, yet I knew him to be reckless to the extreme where only his own skill was concerned. I couldn't even imagine his going to this elaborate risk merely on account of Smith and Francisco. Something bigger must be involved. I stared at the rows of specimens. Communications is science, Benda had said, and it came back to me as I studied the bent worms and beetles with 2 legs missing. I was confident that the solution would be simple. Once the key idea occurred to me, I knew I should find the whole thing astonishingly direct and systematic. For a moment I tried to attach some sort of hieroglyphic significance to the specimen forms. In the writing of the American Indians, a waving line meant water, and an inverted V meant a wigwam, but I discarded that idea in a moment. Benda's mind didn't work along the paths of symbolism. It would have to be something mathematical, rigidly logical, leaving no room for guesswork. No sooner had the key idea occurred to me than the basic conception underlying all these rows of twigs and bugs simply flashed into clear meaning before me. The simplicity of it took my breath away. I know it, I said aloud, though I was alone. Very simple. I was prepared for the fact that each one of the specimens... Sorry, I heard a noise. I was prepared for the fact that each one of the specimens represented a letter of the alphabet. If nothing else, their number indicated that. Now I could see so clearly that the photograph shouted at me. Each specimen consisted of an upright stem, and from this middle stem projected side arms to the right and to the left, and in various vertical locations on each side. The middle upright stem contained these side arms in various numbers and combinations. In 5 minutes I had a copy of the message, translated into its fundamental characters, as shown on plate 2. Oh, there were illustrations in here of plate 1 and plate 2, but I didn't get the copy with illustrations. I don't normally, actually, for the show, just because, we're audio-based here. So here's where we would see plate 1, but it's about to be described. The first grass blade was the simple, upright stem. The second, 3 leaflets on their stem represented the upright portion, with 2 arms to the left at the top and middle, and 1 arm to the right at the top, and so on and so forth. That brought the message down to the simple and straightforward matter of a substitution cipher. I was confident that Benda had no object in introducing any complications that could possibly be avoided, as his sole purpose was to get to me the most readable message without getting caught at it. I recollected now how cautious he had been to hand me no paper, and how obviously and openly he had dropped each specimen into my book, because he knew someone was watching him and expecting him to slip in a message. He had, as I could see now in the retrospect, been conspicuously careful that nothing suspicious should pass from his hands to mine. Substitution ciphers are easy to solve, especially for those having some experience. The method that can be found in Edgar Allan Poe's Gold Bug, and in a host of its imitators besides. Secret Service cipherman could have it read in an hour, but I knew my friend's mind well enough to go find a shortcut. I knew just how he'd go about devising such a cipher, In fact, how 99% out of 100 with a scientific education would do it. If we begin adding horizontal arms to the middle stem, from the top to bottom and from left to right, the possible characters can be worked out by the system shown on plate 3. Plate 3 that we can't see. It's most logical to suppose that Benda would begin with the first sign and substitute the letters of the alphabet in order. That would give us the cipher code shown on plate 4. It was all very quick work, just as I had anticipated once the key idea had occurred to me. The ease and speed of my method far exceeded that of Poe's method, but of course that was applicable only to this particular case. Substituting letters for signs out of my diagram, I got the following message. Am prisoner. R plans capture of New York by seizing power, water, and phones. Then world conquest. SOS. R for context, since it's been a good long while. R is the leader of this science community. His name is... I just said it earlier in the episode, actually. Rohan. Yeah, so as noted by the cipher here, Rohan is planning capture of New York first by appointing people to control the Department of Power, Water, and then the phones. And once they have control of all that, locking down the city and enforcing his particular brand of influence over the whole world. And Benda only just barely got a message out. Likely undetected. Really remarkable stuff, honestly. Tell you what, gang. I think I'm gonna call it here. I'm gonna call it an evening here. But before I go, I do want to promote all my stuff just once more. First up, we have a Discord around here. I'm not sure I've mentioned it this fine evening, but we have a Discord. I know a lot of streamers have Discords, a lot of content creators have Discords, but this one's really great, actually. I've been putting a lot of content into the Discord that only comes out of the Discord at a massive delay. I've been posting about some embroidery projects of mine. I've been posting pictures of my bread, because I bake bread once a week. I'll post pictures of the cats that you are highly unlikely to see anywhere else. There is some space in the Discord to talk about what books we're reading, if you have opinions on what we've been reading, if you have opinions on what we should be reading, that kind of thing. There's plenty of space to talk about, everything else I wind up doing on the channel. I really heartily suggest the Discord. I think it's a good time. It's relatively quiet, but we have fun in there. Let's see what else. I have a YouTube channel where all of the video of all these streams goes. Those drop on Saturdays, usually around noon and around 6 p.m. That's in Pacific time, but it'll go up when it goes up. In case I ever wind up actually finishing any other video-based ideas that are not stream VODs, those will also go up there, so keep one eye on it. If you're a particular enjoyer of short-form video, I've been winding up the machine, as it were, to polish off some more short-form video, so those will go up both on YouTube and on TikTok, both under the name Glacier Nestor. What else? We said we haven't pointed out that this is a podcast. That's the whole shtick of Paper Cuts, is that we're doing a live audiobook to a live audience, a live internet audience. We are reading aloud a book, sometimes a different one, until we finish them each time. And if you were behind on Paper Cuts and you want a little bit more refined version of the live show, that's what the podcast feed is great for. We are about to, this very Saturday, shift our release schedule to be weekly, so it'll be much more accessible for you, the end viewer. I really hope you like it. I put a surprising amount of work into it, honestly. Let's see, I did Discord, I did podcast, I did YouTube and mention short form videos. I don't think I have anything else to promote, other than, obviously, given my soapbox there, your local library. With that, folks, I think I am truly properly going to call it an evening. We're going to call it there. Come back next week for a book that I am not going to tease any information about. Keep one eye on the Discord for that. This has been Paper Cuts, and I hope it didn't sting.